Kami ucapkan selamat pagi sekaligus selamat datang kepada yang terhormat Ketua Umum AIP, Ibu Agustina Arunsari. The Honorable Mr. John Fong, the Sustainable Finance Lead of Monash Climate Works Center Australia and holds an adjunct professorship at Monash University, Indonesia. The Honorable Ms. Sarah Garden, CEO and co-founder Satarla. Kepada yang kami hormati, Bapak Stefanus Alexander Sianturi, Treasurer of ACFE Indonesia. Yang kami hormati, Bapak Rahadian Widakdo, Subkoordinator Program dan Evaluasi Penerapan JFA Instansi Pusat dan Daerah 2, Pusbin JFA BPKP. Yang kami hormati, seluruh anggota Dewan Pengurus Pusat AIP, yang kami hormati Dewan Pengurus Wilayah AIP, dan seluruh hadirin webinar yang berbahagia. Bapak Ibu, izinkan saya Sylvia Sarumaha, selaku Master of Ceremony pada hari ini, menyapa hadirin sebelum acara ini dimulai. Kegiatan ini merupakan rangkaian webinar yang diselenggarakan AIP yang bekerja sama dengan World Bank and Donors melalui Public Financial Management Multi-Donor Trust Fund Phase 3. Saya ingin tahu, apakah Bapak Ibu sebelumnya sudah pernah mengikuti webinar yang diselenggarakan AIP? Jika ya, mohon ketikkan angka 1 di kolom chat. Izinkan saya menyapa Bapak Ibu yang sudah hadir di kolom chat. Baik, sebelum acara dimulai, kami mohon Bapak Ibu untuk memastikan sambungan internet dalam kondisi yang baik. Dan Bapak Ibu dapat menggunakan headset agar suara tidak terdistorsi. Dan kami mohon kesediaan Bapak Ibu untuk mengaktifkan kamera selama kegiatan berlangsung. Karena kegiatan ini akan kita mulai beberapa saat lagi. Mohon perhatian dan selamat pagi. Burung-burung berkicauan menambah asri suasana pagi. Selamat bergabung Tuan dan Puan dalam acara webinar AIP. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi dan salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Puji syukur kehadirat Tuhan Yang Maha Kuasa, karena izin dan ridhonya, kita semua dapat berkumpul dalam suasana yang berbahagia ini, dalam acara webinar AIP, Fraud Universe Methodology in the Rise of Environmental, Social, and Governance, ESG Issues. Semoga kita semua dalam kondisi sehat dan selalu dalam lindungan Tuhan Yang Maha Kuasa. Acara ini diselenggarakan secara online melalui ruang Zoom meeting dan dapat disaksikan pula pada kanal YouTube dan dihadiri oleh APIP di seluruh wilayah Indonesia. Saat ini telah hadir tamu-tamu istimewa. Izinkan saya terlebih dahulu menyapa kepada yang terhormat Ketua Umum AIP, Ibu Agustina Arunsari.
Selamat pagi.
Pagi. The Honorable Mr. John Fong, the Sustainable Finance Lead of Monash Climate Works Center Australia and holds an adjunct professorship at Monash University, Indonesia. The Honorable Ms. Sarah Garden, CEO and co-founder Telah. Kepada yang kami hormati, Bapak Stefanus Alexander Sianturi, Treasurer of ACFE Indonesia.
Selamat pagi semuanya, selamat pagi Bapak Ibu.
Yang kami hormati, Bapak Rahadian Widakdo, Subkoordinator Program dan Evaluasi Penerapan JFA Instansi Pusat dan Daerah 2, Pusbin JFA BPKP.
Selamat pagi Mbak Sylvia, selamat pagi Bapak Ibu sekalian. Good morning, Dr. Janfong.
Yang kami hormati, seluruh anggota Dewan Pengurus Pusat AIP, yang kami hormati Dewan Pengurus Wilayah AIP, dan seluruh hadirin webinar yang berbahagia. Saya, Sylvia Sarumaha, senang sekali mendapatkan kesempatan untuk memandu acara ini sampai dengan selesai. Kegiatan ini merupakan rangkaian webinar yang diselenggarakan AIP bekerja sama dengan World Bank and donors melalui Public Financial Management Multi-Donor Trust Fund Phase 3. Acara ini diselenggarakan guna membangun kesadaran terkait fraud universe methodology in the rise of environmental, social, and governance ESG issues bagi auditor intern pemerintah, sehingga auditor intern pemerintah dapat menilai program ESG dilaksanakan secara efisien, efektif, berdampak, dan antisipatif, sehingga apabila terjadi fraud dapat dideteksi lebih awal dan ditangani dengan baik. Adapun susunan acara pada hari ini adalah pembukaan, mendengarkan lagu Indonesia Raya, doa yang akan dipimpin oleh Saudara Reza Putra Chandra Novianto, dilanjutkan dengan keynote speech dari Ketua Umum AIP, Ibu Agustina Arumsari, kemudian akan dilanjutkan dengan diskusi panel yang akan dihadiri oleh pembicara yang kompeten di bidangnya. Kemudian penutup yang diagendakan selesai pada pukul 12.15 waktu Indonesia bagian Barat. Hadirin, sebagai wujud syukur kita menjadi bagian dari Negara Kesatuan Republik Indonesia, mengawali acara pada pagi hari ini, mari bersama kita dengarkan lagu kebangsaan Indonesia Raya. agar seluruh agenda yang menjadi upaya kita bersama dapat berjalan dengan lancar. Bersama-sama kita akan menundukkan kepala sejenak, memohon ridho Tuhan Yang Maha Kuasa. Untuk memimpin pembacaan doa kepada Bapak Reza Putra Chandra Novianto, kami silakan.
Mohon izin Bapak dan Ibu, saya akan membacakan doa dengan cara Islam. Bagi Bapak Ibu yang memiliki keyakinan lain, mohon untuk menyesuaikan. A'udzubillahi minasyaitonirrajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Hamdan syakirin, hamdan na'imin, hamdan yu'afini ama wa yukafi masidah. Ya Rabbana lakal hamdu kama yanbahi li jalali wajhika wa asmi wa azimi sultani. Asyhadu alla ilaha illallah wa asyhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim, hanya kepadamu kami menyembah dan hanya kepadamu kami memohon pertolongan. Ya Rabbana, hari ini kami berkumpul secara daring dalam kegiatan webinar ini, berdiskusi mengurai ilmu untuk memberikan sumbangsih terbaik bagi bangsa ini. Karenanya ya Allah, lancarkanlah acara kami, berkahilah, penuhilah pertemuan ini dengan kebaikan dari awal hingga akhir nanti. Bukalah pikiran kami, dan berikanlah kepada kami ide-ide dan gagasan cemerlang untuk membangun kekuatan ekonomi bangsa ini. Ya Allah yang Maha Mengetahui yang gaib, bimbinglah kami dengan hidayah-Mu, berkahilah kami selalu dengan takdir-Mu, dan jadikanlah hati kami selalu ridho dengan pemberian-Mu. Ya Allah, tunjukkanlah kepada kami bahwa yang benar adalah benar, dan berikanlah kepada kami kekuatan untuk dapat menjalankannya. Serta tunjukkanlah kepada kami yang salah adalah salah, dan berikanlah kepada kami kekuatan untuk dapat meninggalkannya. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanah, wa fil akhirati hasanah, wa qina azabannar. Ya Allah ya Tuhan kami, limpahkanlah kepada kami kebahagiaan di dunia dan akhirat, dan hindarkanlah kami dari azab api neraka-Mu. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun, wassalamu ala mursalin, walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.
Terima kasih, Bapak Reza Putra Chandra Novianto. Selanjutnya, untuk semakin mengobarkan semangat IP, marilah kita mendengarkan lagu Mars IP.
Indonesia, ASN di bumi Nusantara. Kami di kementerian serta lembaga, provinsi, kabupaten dan kota, auditor bermartabat dan terpercaya, masyarakat adil sejahtera. AHIP jagai negeri, jagai dana dan sumber daya. AHIP jagai pimpinan, pakai mata, tangan dan telinga. Berpaculah semuanya, jayalah AHIP kita. Indonesia, ASN di bumi Nusantara. Kami di kementerian serta lembaga, provinsi, kabupaten dan kota, auditor bermartabat dan terpercaya, masyarakat adil sejahtera. AHIP jagai negeri, jagai dana dan sumber daya. AHIP jagai pimpinan, pakai mata, tangan dan telinga. Berpaculah semuanya, jayalah AHIP.
Hadirin, pembangunan berkelanjutan pada dasarnya merupakan alat dan sarana untuk mencapai agenda pembangunan nasional yang mensyaratkan partisipasi dan kolaborasi semua pihak. Sebagai auditor intern pemerintah Indonesia, kita wajib mengembangkan pengetahuan kita akan hal-hal baru, seperti pengetahuan akan ESG, dan aware bahwa investasi dalam pelaksanaan ESG secara inherent akan menimbulkan exposure terhadap risiko terjadinya fraud. Selanjutnya, mari kita simak bersama keynote speech sekaligus membuka kegiatan webinar hari ini kepada yang terhormat Ketua Umum AIP dan juga Deputi Kepala BPKP Bidang Investigasi, Ibu Agustina Arumsari. Kami persilahkan.
Baik, terima kasih Ibu Sylvia Sarumaha sebagai pembawa acara. Ibu Pak semua, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Yang terhormat para pengurus yang tergabung dalam Dewan Pengurus Nasional AIP, yang kami hormati para pimpinan APIP di lingkungan kementerian, lembaga, pemerintah daerah, Dewan Pengurus Wilayah AIP se-Indonesia, para pembicara dan narasumber webinar, Mr. John Fong, Mrs. Sarah Gordon, Pak Alexander Sianturi, Bapak Rahadian Widakdo, serta anggota AIP di seluruh Indonesia. Puji syukur, marilah kita haturkan kepada Tuhan Yang Maha Kuasa karena berkat rahmat dan karunia-Nya kita dapat hadir dan berkumpul dalam kegiatan ini di tengah-tengah kesibukan kita menyelesaikan tugas dan pekerjaan kita di penghujung tahun. Izin saya terlebih dahulu akan menyampaikan keynote speech dan kemudian nanti saya akan lanjutkan dengan menampilkan sedikit lesson learn dari apa yang kami lakukan dalam audit tata kelola industri kelapa sawit yang lalu. Dan mohon maaf juga setelah itu, setelah membuka, saya izin juga untuk tidak bergabung langsung, tetapi saya memantau melalui YouTube karena saya akan rapat offline. Jadi mohon izin sekaligus dalam kesempatan ini saya mungkin tidak bisa sampai akhir nantinya. Ibu Bapak semua hadirin yang berbahagia, sebagaimana kita pahami bersama bahwa dalam rangka mencapai tujuan bernegara sebagaimana tertuang dalam pembukaan Undang-Undang Dasar 1945, pemerintah telah melakukan berbagai upaya untuk mewujudkan pembangunan yang berkeadilan dan mensejahterakan masyarakat Indonesia. Upaya tersebut kita rasakan melalui serangkaian pembangunan yang berkelanjutan dimulai sejak Indonesia merdeka hingga hari ini. Pembangunan yang berkelanjutan tersebut, pembangunan yang dapat memenuhi kebutuhan masa kini tanpa mengorbankan generasi masa depan. Dengan mengedepankan kesejahteraan tiga dimensi, yaitu sosial, ekonomi, dan lingkungan, pembangunan berkelanjutan pada dasarnya merupakan alat dan sarana untuk mencapai agenda pembangunan nasional yang mensyaratkan partisipasi dan kolaborasi semua pihak. Pembangunan berkelanjutan mencakup tujuan-tujuan yang sering atau yang saling berkaitan, termasuk pembangunan untuk menanggulangi kerentanan bencana, perubahan iklim, serta tata kelola pemerintahan yang baik. Ibu Bapak yang berbahagia, pada pertengahan November 2022 yang lalu dalam peluncuran Kerangka Kerja dan Manual Environmental, Social, and Governance, Menteri Keuangan menyatakan bahwa peluncuran Kerangka Kerja ESG sebagaimana dilaksanakan untuk membangun infrastruktur berkelanjutan bagi Indonesia yang selaras dengan komitmen SDGs 2030 dan amanat RPJMN 2020-2024. Kerangka Kerja dan Manual Lingkungan Sosial dan Tata Kelola atau yang sering disebut Environmental, Social, and Governance disusun dalam rangka mendukung dan memfasilitasi pemerintah dalam pembiayaan infrastruktur dan investasi dalam pelaksanaan ESG secara inheren akan menimbulkan exposure terhadap risiko terjadinya fraud. Ibu Bapak semua, survei terakhir yang dilakukan oleh ACFE atas fraud di Indonesia tahun 2019 menyatakan bahwa fraud yang sering terjadi dan menyebabkan kerugian terbesar di Indonesia adalah tindak pidana korupsi. Berbagai media pengungkapannya, 4 media yang mengungkapkan fraud secara terbanyak adalah laporan manajemen sebesar 38,9%, aktivitas audit intern 23,4%, lainnya 15,1%, dan aktivitas audit eksternal 9,6%. Dengan persentase tersebut, Ibu dan Bapak, menunjukkan bahwa pengendalian intern memegang peranan penting dalam meminimalkan kerugian yang terjadi akibat tindakan fraud, termasuk di dalamnya adalah aktivitas audit internal, memegang peranan yang penting dalam mengungkapkan fraud. AIP sebagai wadah organisasi bagi auditor intern di lingkungan pemerintah Indonesia sangat perlu untuk mengambil peran dalam implementasi kerangka kerja dan manual environmental, social, and governance. Peran tersebut dapat dilakukan dari aspek tata kelola, manajemen risiko, maupun pengendalian intern atas implementasi ESG pada kegiatan pembangunan, khususnya proyek infrastruktur. Hal tersebut sejalan dengan tema Rencana Kerja Pemerintah tahun 2023, yaitu peningkatan produktivitas dan transformasi ekonomi yang inklusif dan berkelanjutan. Kita sebagai auditor internal tentu saja harus mengawal agar rencana kerja pemerintah ini dapat berjalan dengan baik sesuai yang direncanakan dan sekaligus juga meminimalkan adanya fraud. Ibu Bapak yang berbahagia, kita juga tahu bahwa 9 Desember yang lalu kita melakukan atau memperingati Hari Anti Korupsi Sedunia atau Hakordia, di mana dalam puncak peringatan Hari Anti Korupsi itu Wakil Presiden Republik Indonesia mengingatkan kepada kita semua bahwa salah satu potensi korupsi adalah dalam bentuk kebijakan, mengubah alokasi sumber daya yang seharusnya diproduksi demi kepentingan publik dibajak demi memuaskan oligarki. Sedikit lesson learned yang nanti akan kami sharing adalah hasil dari pengawasan intern yang dilakukan oleh BPKP di dalam tata kelola industri kelapa sawit yang lalu. Untuk webinar kali ini kita mengambil tema Fraud Universe Methodology in the Rise of Environmental, Social, and Governance Issues, untuk mencoba mendiskusikan bagaimana risiko dan titik-titik penyimpangan yang harus menjadi perhatian kita dalam melaksanakan pembangunan berkelanjutan dengan memperhatikan dimensi environmental, sosial, dan governance. Sebagai pembuka diskusi, saya akan melanjutkan sedikit paparan tentang lesson learned dari hasil audit tata kelola industri kelapa sawit yang lalu yang dilakukan oleh BPKP, dibantu dengan beberapa APIP yang lain, dilanjutkan dengan materi, dan nanti ada pembicara dari para narasumber yang tentu sangat berkompeten di bidangnya. Terima kasih atas perkenan para narasumber untuk hadir, dan mungkin saya izin untuk share materi tentang hasil lesson learned dari audit yang lalu. Mohon maaf, ini hostnya saya masih di disable ya. Oke. Mudah-mudahan sudah terlihat ya. Baik. Kebetulan dalam audit ini saya sebagai penanggung jawab juga pelaksanaan audit ini, dan ini merupakan kolaborasi dari beberapa kedeputian di BPKP sebagai auditor internal pemerintah, dan saya menampilkan isu ini ya sebagai juga mungkin nanti bahan diskusi kita. Tema yang saya paparkan adalah integrasi isu-isu korupsi dan keberlanjutan dalam desain pelaksanaan pengawasan intern. Dan mohon maaf, beberapa hal mungkin kami tidak menyampaikan hasil audit secara detail, tetapi lesson learn-nya yang penting karena memang beberapa hal terkait dengan confidentiality dan juga masih dalam proses untuk perbaikan ke depan, gitu ya. Nah, yang ada dua hal saja yang akan saya sampaikan. Yang pertama adalah lesson learn dari audit tata kelola industri sawit. Nah, ini isu tentang sawit ini menjadi isu global dan terutama juga bagi Indonesia yang beberapa waktu lalu isu global itu adalah mempertanyakan tentang bagaimana Indonesia mengelola industri kelapa sawitnya. Dan pentingnya kerangka kerja pengawasan terintegrasi berbasis resiko. Jadi itu mungkin nanti menjadi bahan diskusi kita. Nah, Ibu dan Bapak, lesson learn dari audit atas tata kelola industri kelapa sawit itu bermula dari isu-isu atau bukan isu sebenarnya ya, kita melihat sendiri dengan kasat mata bagaimana di media, televisi, media online, ada beberapa berita-berita di mana beberapa daerah bahkan sampai warga harus berdesak-desakan antri minyak goreng di minimarket tanpa prokes, bahkan ada yang meninggal saat antri. Kemudian juga migor langka waktu itu, harga melambung tinggi. Saya sebagai salah satu ibu-ibu ini juga merasakan harga per 2 liter minyak goreng dari tadinya sekitar 25 menjadi 50.000, bahkan kosong di supermarket ya. Kemudian juga kami tadinya diminta tentang audit kelapa sawit ini, terutama adalah program plasma waktu itu ya, salah satu isunya. Namun pada saat dalam proses pelaksanaan audit atau pada saat proses mendesain pengawasan tersebut, kami melihat bahwa sebenarnya isu-isu ini adalah isu-isu yang terintegrasi. Dari kalau kita bicara minyak goreng, kita bicara ada di sektor hilirnya saja, tetapi kita belum melihat sisi hulunya. Oleh karena itu kami kemudian berdiskusi dengan berbagai stakeholder dan kami melihat bahwa penting sekali melakukan integrasi isu-isu sustainability dan isu-isu tentang kinerja, tentang kepatuhan, tentang keberlanjutan, tentang korupsi dan hambatan kelancaran pembangunan. Mungkin kalau Ibu dan Bapak nanti melihat singkatan isu KKK, HKP itu maksudnya seperti itu ya. Jadi dari situlah kemudian lahir pemikiran-pemikiran bagaimana kalau kita melakukan desain pengawasan secara terintegrasi berbagai isu yang ada. Pertama adalah isu tentang sustainability, di mana dari berbagai referensi menunjukkan adanya deforestasi akibat perkebunan sawit, kemudian konflik tenurial lahan sawit, kebijakan subsidi biodiesel di Indonesia, hak-hak petani plasma dan dampak sosial dan ekologis perkebunan sawit, serta sertifikasi keberlanjutan perkebunan sawit yang memang dituntut oleh masyarakat global ketika isu-isu tentang sustainability itu mengemuka dalam industri global ya, dalam masyarakat global. Nah, itu isu-isu yang pertama yang kami lihat terkait dengan sustainability. Namun kami juga melihat ada beberapa hal yang lain dan kebetulan pada saat itu juga kami menangani salah satu kasus korupsi yang berkaitan dengan legalitas lahan kebun kelapa sawit ya. Maka kami mengangkat isu-isu ini, legalitas lahan kebun kelapa sawit, perizinan usaha. Kita tahu bahwa ada beberapa izin yang berkaitan dengan kelapa sawit ini, ya dari mulai IUP, dari mulai HGU, dari izin pelepasan hutan, dan yang lainnya. Kemudian juga pungutan ekspor dan pajak sektor kelapa sawit, bagaimana penggunaannya ya melalui BPD PKS, kemudian kepemilikan dan dominasi korporasi, karena kami melihat pada saat terjadinya kelangkaan minyak goreng, maka kok bisa gitu kira-kira terjadi. Bagaimana sebenarnya para penyuplai minyak goreng ini, siapakah mereka dan bagaimana korporasi mereka menjalankan usahanya. Kemudian juga tata kelola pabrik kelapa sawit, termasuk isu tentang akuntansi biaya dan struktur harga. Nah, Ibu dan Bapak, seluruh isu yang kami lihat pada saat kami melakukan penelitian awal, kami lihat bahwa ini saling berkelindan satu sama lain. baik itu sustainability maupun isu-isu kepatuhan korupsi yang berdampak pada tidak optimalnya pencapaian tujuan pembangunan. Kami melakukan audit selama kurang lebih 3 bulan dan hasil audit sudah kami serahkan kepada Bapak Presiden, di mana dalam hasil audit tersebut kami memotret kondisi yang ada secara lebih komprehensif, mencangkup isu tentang hindsight-nya seperti apa yang lalu, tingkat dalamnya informasi atau insight, dan terutama juga kalau isu-isu ini, hasil audit ini tidak kita mitigasi resikonya, ada hal-hal atau potensi masalah ke depannya atau foresight-nya. Dan ini sudah kami sampaikan, Bapak Kepala menyampaikan kepada Bapak Presiden secara langsung, dan Bapak Presiden sangat concern dengan isu ini, dan dalam waktu dekat akan ada kepres untuk melakukan pembenahan tata kelola industri kelapa sawit. Kira-kira seperti itu perjalanan atau lesson learned dari pengawasan audit yang kami lakukan atas industri kelapa sawit. Nah, Ibu dan Bapak, bagaimana kemudian penugasan pengawasan intern yang kita lakukan? Maka lesson learn-nya adalah kita harus melihat permasalahan secara komprehensif pada saat informasi awal itu mengemuka. Kita tidak melihat hanya masalah migornya saja, tetapi juga masalah faktor-faktor risiko governance, risk, compliance, dan kontrol ya, yang kami melihat adanya governansi yang kurang kolaboratif, maka ada beberapa isu, izin A diberikan, izin B tidak diberikan, kemudian ada di kawasan hutan lindung dan sebagainya, itu adalah terjadi karena memang kurangnya kolaborasi dalam governansi, risiko tidak terkelola dengan baik, sistem manajemen kepatuhan yang tidak efektif, dan kelemahan pengendalian intern. Nah, itu yang kami kembangkan sehingga pada awalnya kami tujuannya melihat tentang isu migor, ternyata kami harus mengembangkan informasi secara lebih komprehensif, melihat seluruh industri ini dari hulu sampai hilir, dan kemudian merencanakannya. Nah, ini adalah proses perencanaan yang kami lakukan. Kami melakukan analisis regulasi, siapa melakukan apa, berbagai aturan yang ada, analisis sistem informasi yang telah ada, ya, beberapa sistem informasi berkaitan dengan penyaluran migor dan sebagainya sudah ada, tetapi setelah kita lihat ternyata dari sisi hulunya belum ada sistem informasi yang terintegrasi, dan juga melakukan data analitik, melakukan analisis political exposed person, ultimate beneficial owner, dan kemudian analisis hasil evaluasi, analisis dari World Bank, ADB, perguruan tinggi, LSM, lembaga think tank lain, termasuk bagian-bagian yang kami pelajari, dan melakukan workshop dengan narasumber expert dan koordinasi dengan APIP yang lainnya. Dan kemudian kami melaksanakan, dan sebagaimana tadi saya sudah sampaikan, pelaporan sudah selesai dan sudah disampaikan kepada stakeholder utama yaitu Bapak Presiden, dan selanjutnya kami akan melakukan pemantauan tindak lanjut di mana Bapak Presiden akan mengeluarkan kepres tentang pembenahan tata kelola industri kelapa sawit. Demikian Ibu dan Bapak, kira-kira lesson learned yang kami share berkaitan dengan isu sustainability dan isu-isu lain dari hasil pengawasan tata kelola industri kelapa sawit yang kami lakukan yang lalu. Mudah-mudahan apa yang kami sampaikan nantinya bisa menjadi bahan diskusi, bisa bermanfaat untuk kita ambil juga lesson learn-nya dan bagaimana kaitan dengan permasalahan sustainability berkaitan dengan isu environmental, sosial, dan governance. Ini adalah paparan kami, dan dengan memohon rahmat Tuhan secara resmi webinar Fraud Universe Methodology in the Rise of Environmental, Social, and Governance Issue secara resmi saya nyatakan dibuka. Terima kasih kepada seluruh narasumber, terima kasih kepada pengurus AIP, kepada Puspin JFA yang sudah menyelenggarakan webinar ini, mempersiapkan segala sesuatunya dengan baik sehingga webinar ini dapat terlaksana. Mudah-mudahan ini jumlah partisipannya sudah cukup banyak, termasuk di YouTube, maka Mudah-mudahan webinar ini dapat memberikan manfaat kepada kita semua dan tentu saja memberikan manfaat bagi pemikiran bagaimana pengawasan internal yang harus dilakukan untuk melihat atau juga memperhatikan isu-isu yang ada. Demikian, terima kasih sekaligus nanti saya juga akan mohon undur diri Ibu MC ya, karena saya harus menghadiri rapat offline. Terima kasih, saya akhiri. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Om Santi, Santi, Santi Om, Nama Budaya, salam kebajikan. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih kepada Ibu Agustina Arumsari atas sambutan dan telah membuka acara pagi ini. Hadirin, perlu kami sampaikan, sertifikat akan terkirim otomatis ke alamat email atau nomor WA yang terdaftar. Maka, pastikan kembali Bapak Ibu telah mengisi daftar hadir dengan benar dan lengkap. Selanjutnya, tanpa mengurangi rasa hormat, apabila Ibu Ketua Umum AIP memiliki agenda lainnya, kami persilahkan.
Terima kasih Bu MC, izin live. Terima kasih Ibu Bapak semua.
Hadirin, guna lebih memperdalam wawasan kita bersama, mari kita beranjak ke acara inti, yaitu diskusi panel. Webinar Fraud Universe Methodology in the Rise of Environmental, Social, and Governance ESG Issues. Dalam diskusi panel kali ini, akan hadir narasumber Mr. John Fong dari Sustainable Finance Lead of Monash Climate Work Center Australia and Adjunct Professorship at Monash University Indonesia, Ms. Sarah Gordon, CEO and Co-founder Satarla, dan Bapak Stefanus Alexander Sianturi, Treasurer of ACFE Indonesia. Bagi para hadirin yang ingin bertanya, dapat mengajukan pertanyaan melalui link Slido yang di-share pada Linktree webinar auditor. Atau Bapak Ibu dapat melakukan scan pada barcode yang akan kami tampilkan berikut ini dengan kode 1657162. 1657162. Dan bagi hadirin yang ingin menyimak materi dari pemateri luar negeri dalam bahasa Indonesia, hadirin dapat mengklik menu Interpretation di bar bawah aplikasi Zoom Anda dan memilih bahasa Indonesia. Diskusi panel akan berlangsung kurang lebih sampai dengan pukul 12 waktu Indonesia bagian Barat, yang akan dipandu oleh seorang moderator yang luar biasa. Izinkan terlebih dahulu saya memperkenalkan moderator. Beliau merupakan seorang lelaki yang cerdas, bernama Rahadian Widakdo, SST, AKT, MSc, yang menyelesaikan Sekolah Tinggi Akuntansi Negara tahun 2010 dan Master of Science Financial Accounting di University of Birmingham 2015. Terlibat aktif sebagai anggota Institute of Internal Auditor, pengurus pada Komite Standar Akuntansi Pemerintahan KSAP, dan pengurus pada IAI Kompartemen Akuntan Sektor Publik. Berpengalaman sebagai PNS di BPKP, menjadi auditor di Sulawesi Tenggara, Bali, Jakarta, bidang pengawasan penyelenggaraan keuangan daerah, pejabat struktural di MKOT BPKP, dan saat ini sebagai subkoordinator program dan evaluasi penerapan JFA Instansi Pusat dan Daerah 2 Pusbin JFA BPKP. Tanpa berlama-lama lagi, mari kita sambut moderator handal kita. Kepada Bapak Rahadian Widakdo, kami persilakan.
Baik, terima kasih banyak Mbak Sylvia. Perkenalannya terlalu bombastis nih Mbak Sylvia. Baik, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Yang terhormat Ibu Ketua DPNAIP, para anggota DPNAIP. I would like to say hello to our speakers as well. Good morning, Dr. John Fong. How are you, Doctor?
I'm fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for joining with us. Dr. John Fong is joined from Australia.
Yes, I'm in Melbourne at the moment.
Okay, Dr. John Fong. The next presenter is Dr. Sarah Gordon. Good morning, Dr. Gordon.
Good morning.
Good morning. Dr. Jordan is joined with us from London, isn't it, right now? Yeah.
That is correct. So it really is morning.
It is 4 o'clock in the morning. Yeah.
Something like that.
Really appreciate for your presence today. And
A pleasure.
The next speaker is Mr. Alexander Sianturi, Bapak Alexander Sianturi from HEFI Indonesia. Selamat pagi, Bapak.
Selamat pagi, Pak Edo. Good morning, John, and good morning, very early morning, Sarah.
Iya, terima kasih sudah hadir memenuhi undangan kami, Pak Alexander Sianturi. Baik, Bapak Ibu yang kami hormati, Bapak Ibu dari kementerian, lembaga, pemerintah daerah, badan usaha, akademisi, dan pengamat isu-isu mengenai internal audit. Webinar akan kami sampaikan dalam bahasa Inggris dan bahasa Indonesia. So I will moderate in English and Indonesia. Bagi rekan-rekan yang ingin menggunakan fasilitas interpretation, seperti tadi disampaikan oleh MC, bisa mengklik mendengarkan terjemahan dengan mengklik interpretation di sebelah kanan layar Bapak Ibu sekalian. Baik, I'm very honored for being here among all the prominent speaker, and we're also glad to have, ladies and gentlemen, here. It's thousands participants that join with us through Zoom webinar and YouTube. We're going to talk about the issues that emerging in over the world, especially in Indonesia. That is environmental, social, and governance, or we call it ESG. We're intrigued on know how ESG issues could be very important nowadays, the backgrounds, how countries adapt with the framework in ESG in developed countries and in developing countries, of course. Because in the first era of ESG, we know Kyoto Protocol, 30 years ago, there's some issues for sustainable development mechanism, which is seems unfair in developing countries. It's been accused for wealthiness hindrance in developing countries. But just before Paris Agreement in 2015, developing countries had caused more significantly to climate change. So compared to developing countries, the first is China, I think, surpassed the US. And also, is it ESG something that could be exposed the risk of misconducts, wrongdoings, and fraud, just like Mrs. Arumsari said before. And then more specifically, how internal audit role to tackle fraud in ESG. As the data we got from HEFI surveys, probably Mr. Alexander Sianturi will explain us later about the internal audit activities is disclosed fraud at least 24%, which is quite high compared to the other activities. Therefore, to know the techniques and methodologies for handling fraud on ESG, it is very important for internal auditors these days. And we'll talk today will be about fraud universe methodology in the rise of ESG. Okay, before we started our panel discussion, let me introduce our speakers. The first speaker is Dr. John Fong. Dr. John Fong is Sustainable Finance Lead of Monash Climate Work Centre, Australia, and holds an adjunct professorship at Monash University, Indonesia. As a senior consultant to the World Bank Group, Asian Development Bank, and UNDP, he provides technical assistance to the central banks, financial regulators, institutions, and the private sector to create enabling environments for mobilizing capital towards achieving net zero and Paris-aligned objectives. He has also co-edited 4 books published by Springer, written policy reports for multinational development agencies, and held teaching roles at the National University Singapore, Nanyang Technology University, Singapore Management University, and Monash University, Australia. Dr. Fong has PhD and MBA both from the University of Bradford and BA from Birmingham City University. Maybe we both live in the same neighborhood previously, Dr. Fong, because I live in Sally Oak previously in Birmingham while taking my master degree. And he is also qualified, Dr. Fong is also qualified as CPA Australia and alumni of the joint UNDP MIT Harvard University Public Dispute Program. Without further ado, I would like Dr. Fong to deliver his presentation for approximately 30 minutes. Dr. Fong, the time is yours.
Thank you so much, Pak Ido. And in the face of all the distinguished speakers and the panelists, I really feel inadequate, but I will try my best anyway. Yeah. So let me share the slides with you that I have prepared. I have only about 10 slides. Saya ada hanya 10 slide dan saya mau berbagi-bagi untuk teman-teman yang mau tahu di mana tempat ya ada fraud yang memandang kita tapi kita sendiri tidak lihat. The fraud issues are looking at us, staring at us, but we don't see it. So that is the most dangerous fraud. Okay, but before I go there, I want to share with you what is the size of this ESG climate action program in the world and in Indonesia. So let me share the slides now. Okay, so the ESG issues towards fraud detection and overview. And I want to tackle one major issue that we are staring at, that we don't know, really. We have not, many people cannot see it. So I'm going to expose it today for everybody to see. Now, the size of the market that we are looking at. In the fiscal year of 2022, the World Bank Group delivered a record of $31.7 billion for climate-related investment. Okay, so World Bank Group, yeah, termasuk IFC, which is International Finance Corporation, they have invested into projects that is at a record high, tertinggi, yeah, record yang tertinggi, $31.7 billion. And all this is towards a multiple model climate energy pathways. Developing new oil and gas fields is incompatible with limiting warming 1.5 degrees, Paris-aligned goals. Yeah. So just by investasi di dalam, for example, masih di oil and gas, yeah, ini tidak cocok untuk mencapai tujuannya 1,5 Celsius. So therefore, every government in the world is creating environment and enabling environment for redirecting public and private capital flows towards clean energy. So Bank Dunia semoganya mereka mau pemerintah bisa mengatur ya capital modal di tempat yang untuk green energy and clean energy and renewable energy. All right, so we are looking at a figure of 31.7 billion US dollars in year 2022. What about Indonesia? In Indonesia, baru ada rencana. There is a joint statement by the government of Republic of Indonesia dan international partners group members on the Indonesia Just Energy Transition Plan. The Just Energy Transition Plan. Now, this is a partnership. They call it JETP, which is JTEP, all right? JETP, Just Energy Transition Plan. By the way, when they say just, it's not the same just as Nike, just do it. Itu bukan. There's not the just. This just is about justice, keadilan, keadilan. Bukan just do it, tapi keadilan di dalam energy transisi. Yeah, what does it mean by just? Justice. The justice is that when they transition, just make sure tidak ada orang yang tertinggal. Jangan ada orang yang jadi lebih miskin. Yeah. So that is the keadilan. Untuk transisi, jangan ada orang yang tertinggal. Jangan ada komunitas yang tertinggal. Dan jangan tambahkan masyarakat di bawah. All right. So how much money is Indonesia getting? How much money is the government of Indonesia getting? You look at the second paragraph. On the first day of G20, G20, which is a big conference held in Egypt, and the COP27 is held in Egypt, the G20 is held in Bali. From the Bali, they already announced that Indonesia, we are looking at 20 billion US dollars to support Indonesia's energy transition ambition. What is trying to say? Di dalam bahasa Indonesia sudah ada dana dan ada dukungan dari international partner sampai 20 billion US dollars mendukung Indonesia transisi di dalam energi. All right? Energy transition, 20 billion. So I want to ask, is that this 20 billion and this just now, World Bank talked about 31 billion. Who is doing the auditing in there? Who are the internal auditors that are involved in this major and very significant investments in projects that is transitioning in either energy or in other kind of reducing carbon, decarbonization strategies. So let's look at Deloitte. Deloitte is one of the big four. I'm sure they need no introduction to this group of internal auditors. In their 22 climate check survey, mereka ada satu survey di dalam tahun 2022, and they identify one word, which is called greenwashing. Greenwashing. Greenwashing has emerged as a significant concern for businesses, according to the survey, with 2/3 of executives reporting that it is a major and very serious concern in their industry. Di setiap industri ada keadaan, ada aktivitas greenwashing. Furthermore, Greenwashing was also near the top of the list at 41% of topics, climate-related topics. The executives felt should be more attention given globally. That means harus ada perhatian, ya, ditambah untuk topik greenwashing. And especially, they say that when asked what government should do to encourage business to address climate change towards COP27, that was before COP27, now is going to COP28, cracking down, the word cracking down is menginvestigasi, okay? Cracking down on greenwashing, which is at a very important top spot, a topic discussed globally. So greenwashing could be the biggest fraud that is looking at us, but we can't see it. Because it's so common, it is looking at us that we can't see it. Yeah? So if you want to know where exactly this report is, laporan Deloitte ada dicari di mana, you look at my footnote at the bottom. Footnote at the bottom here. Okay, this is the footnote. You can find the entire report. Now, the key focus areas, if you look at this chart, and this chart comes from the European Banking Authority, like OJK. OJK is Otoritas di Indonesia untuk Keuangan, ya. Tapi this one is European Banking Authority at the European level. And it says what? The key focus areas outlined in the new European Banking Authority roadmap, yeah, include improving transparency on ESG issues, ensuring that ESG-related risks, semua risiko di dalam ESG, are integrated into the financial institutions' risk management framework. This is exactly what Ibu Augustina from BPKP has talked about just now. Harus semua risiko di ESG termasuk di management framework of management risiko dan addressing greenwashing risk. Ada risiko untuk greenwashing juga. All right, so you look at all these risks. They're all together 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 kind of key objectives of ESG roadmap that is given in here in sustainable finance. And number 6 is about greenwashing. Number 6 is about greenwashing. Kalau ibu-ibu, bapak-bapak mau membaca semua roadmap dari European Banking Authoritas, you can again find it at the bottom of the footnote. This is the entire European banking. I mean, it's a big association. It affects all the European countries. And yet, out of 8 important indicators they picked out, one of those that are very risky, and they say you need to focus on this, is greenwashing. So I know many of you probably are looking at Google now. Semua masuk Google, mencari apakah greenwashing. But you don't worry, I already searched for you. Okay, jangan bimbang, jangan ragu-ragu, saya sudah dari Google, I already searched for you. Look at the right-hand side first. Greenwash is defined in the 10th edition of the Concise Oxford English Dictionary as disinformation. Apakah disinformation? Another word for disinformation is fake news. All right? Yeah, fake news. ya, yang tidak benar, informasi yang tidak benar. This information disseminated by an organization so as to present an environmentally responsible public image. In the public, they look very clean and presentable. All right? But it is fake news. It is palsu. It is tidak benar. So greenwashing is derived from the term called whitewashing. Whitewashing was the original word that is that's coined by environmental activists to describe efforts by corporations to portray themselves as environmentally responsible in order to mask, in order to cover, to mask, yeah, bersembunyi, yeah, to mask, to hide environmental wrongdoing. Mereka sudah membuat salah, ya, dampak yang tidak bagus untuk kelingkungan hidup, tapi mereka mau melindungi, bersembunyi, okay, this rahasia yang tidak baik. So this has led to the claims of greenwashing, where companies make false, palsu, or misleading, yang tidak benar, statements about their environmental credentials, whether unintentionally or deliberately in their marketing strategy. This is dari Forbes magazine. Yeah? This is laporan yang palsu dan tidak benar dengan tujuan membohongi atau tidak, dengan tidak sengaja. Yeah? This is also called greenwashing. And then the second one, you look at from the Australian Securities and Investment Commission. That is the Securities Exchange Commission. In Indonesia, it will be called the Securities Exchange Commission. That is for the funds. For example, some of the funds that people invest, ada investasi di dalam bond. That is called, oh, bond ini hijau. Tapi ada investigasi, benar atau tidak, dia hijau atau tidak. So I want to ask whether the internal auditors have talked about this. Ada banyak bond sudah diinvestasi dari banyak fund manager dan ya, tapi ini sebenarnya ada benchmarking atau tidak dengan international. Hijau berapa hijau, ya? So to overrepresent the extent to which the practices are environmental friendly, sustainable, or ethical. And this is called greenwashing, to overrepresent. That means jangan ada terlalu banyak presentasi, ya, kita hijau tapi sebenarnya tidak hijau. All right, so what are the types of greenwashing? All right, so number one, it is questionable certification and label. Ada sertifikat dari mana, ya, tidak tahu. Dan labelingnya dari mana tidak tahu. Mereka bilang, oh, kita sudah green, ya, kita sudah jadi hijau. Ini bukan hanya makan, ya, kacang hijau. Ini sertifikasi hijau. And then something called vagueness. Yeah, vagueness means tidak terlalu jelas. Yeah. Then there's some empty claims and policies. Empty claims. They say, oh, we guarantee you that you do this. This is organic. Tapi sebenarnya tidak organic. Then there's something called selective disclosure, especially di dalam laporan sustainabilitas. Yeah. Ada banyak sekarang, ya, who want to make sustainability report, but they report some parts of it, but not all the parts. Now you have sustainability reporting, you have ESG. They report a little bit on the S. They report a little bit on the E, maybe. They report a lot on the S. And on governance, they also underreport. So underreport the E, underreport in G, and overreport in S. Okay? So it's called selective disclosure. Jangan terlalu jelas. Jangan semuanya 100% ya kasih laporan. Sometimes they use jargon. We are 100% organic. We are a green company. We are eco-friendly. All this is jargon. Yeah, so you have to check. Mereka say eco-friendly. Sebenarnya eco-friendly atau tidak? Apakah benchmark mereka? Then another one is inconsistent organizational practice. You tell me you are very sustainable. Your product is sustainable. You go through all the sustainability. But my question is that saya ada pertanyaan, di organisasi Bapak ada Chief Sustainability Officer atau tidak? Kalau organisasi tidak ada Chief Sustainability Officer, bagaimana caranya siapa yang bertanggung jawab untuk sustainabilitas? Can you imagine? You say that, oh, me and my company, we are very financial efficient, financially very economic, financially very good performance. Tapi kita tidak ada direktur keuangan. Bisa atau tidak? Ibu-ibu dan bapak-bapak. Saya tanya, you tidak bisa. You want to tell me that you are a fantastic finance management company, tapi you tidak ada direktur keuangan. Oh, this is tidak benar mungkin, ya. Sometimes they give it a political spin. Sometimes tidak ada bukti. Mereka tidak ada buktinya. Sometimes they will tell you outright lie, bohong. Sometimes they give you a symbol that they say they're organic. A symbol getting there is green, tapi tidak benar. Yeah, this is called fraudulent advertising. But more than that, they are cheating. It is fraud. Is membohong orang, menginvestasi di perusahaan. Ya, membohong orang, investasi, dibeli saham di perusahaan, beli bond, ya, sukuk di perusahaan, ya. But why do they want to do this? Ya, kenapa? Kenapa perusahaan mau berbohong dan kasih laporan yang palsu? There are three reasons, at least minimum ada 3 alasan. Yang pertama, ada banyak investasi sekarang, mereka mau beli sukuk, green bond, or they want to buy green shares, ya. Mereka mau investasi di dalam perusahaan yang hijau. Especially nowadays, the younger population, orang muda, ya, because they know this will affect them. Orang tua, they don't care, right? Mereka, the runway sudah pendek, ya, tidak ada beberapa tahun lagi, they don't care. But the younger people, they care. So there is a demand, ada banyak yang mau, ya, saham yang dari perusahaan yang hijau atau membeli bond yang, ya, menginvestasi di bond yang hijau. Number 2 is that right now there's no standardized criteria. Everybody say I'm green. Ada international benchmark atau tidak? Akan muncul di dalam tahun 2023 akan muncul. The framework is called ISSB. International Standards for International Sustainability Standards Board. International Sustainability Standards Board, ISSB framework. ISSB datang dari mana? ISSB datang dari IFRS. IFRS. IFRS is International Financial Reporting Standards. Semua tahu, ya. Kita ke sekolah sudah belajar, ya. IFRS. Ya. Alasan ketiga, ada banyak tekanan dan insentif, ya, untuk mau lebih perusahaan mau untuk sendiri tertarik untuk investor, attractive to investor. So these are the three basic reasons that they want to have greenwashing, because number one, there is demand for green products, demand for green investment. Number two, there's no standardized criteria yet. So semua orang mau berbohong-bohong, ya, di hijau. Number three is ada tekanan dan insentif untuk mereka membuat sendiri perusahaan, ya, lebih tertarik untuk investor, ya. I give you one example that you want to look at. I will recommend for the Association of Internal Auditor. I want you to focus on carbon credit and carbon offsets and ask yourself, is this greenwashing? Right now, there's no proof, but people are talking about it. A carbon credit is a kind of permit, izin, that represents 1 ton of carbon dioxide removed from the atmosphere. And they can purchase, mereka bisa membeli carbon credit. All right, and this carbon credit is to show that they have exchanged money, and then what they do is that this money will be put to good use. All right. For example, carbon offsets. Mereka ada wang untuk menanam lebih banyak pohon. Ya. So saya sekarang ada carbon deficit. Okay. Saya mau membeli carbon credit. Saya mau kasih wang untuk membeli carbon credit. Perusahaan yang dapat itu wang atau department bisa menanam lebih banyak pohon, ya, untuk mengurangkan karbon. But really, does this help to decarbonize? Really, ask yourself, ini bisa membantu atau tidak? Kalau saya masih ada banyak di pabrik saya, ada banyak karbon emisi, tapi saya alokasi beberapa juta untuk menanam pohon. Bisa atau tidak ini? Cukup pohon atau tidak? Cukup tanah untuk menanam pohon atau tidak? This is one area I would rekomendasi. Saya highly recommend internal audit to look at and investigasi. So, 30 minit sudah selesai. Banyak terima kasih untuk partisipan dan panelis dan Ibu Edo. Terima kasih, Pak.
Baik, terima kasih Dr. John Fong. Thank you for a really comprehensive explanation and presentation from Dr. John Fong. That's a real case, Dr. John Fong, ya. The greenwashing is nearby. Yeah, I remember I watched Seaspiracy in Netflix. That is also the greenwashing issues about the eco-friendly, dolphin safe, and then certified for fair trade, which is there wouldn't be audit or check and balances through the operation, and then they still doing the unethical fishing. Yeah, unethical fishing. That is one of the example of the greenwashing. And then the carbon permit as well. We talk about the carbon permit. It is permission to pollute the world, or it is really can help reduce decarbonize the world. All right, thank you, Dr. John. I know you guys have been very eager to ask Dr. Fong, but please write your question into the Slido. Bapak Ibu dapat mengakses Slido ya yang ada di sini untuk memberikan pertanyaan kepada semua panelis. All right, we will answer that after the third panelist. And thank you, Dr. Fong. And we begin to the next presenter is Dr. Sarah Gordon. All right. Okay, Dr. Sarah Gordon, she's currently CEO and co-founder Satarla Risk Management, international risk management consultancy that delivers training, consultancy, and research in enterprise-wide risk management that's based in UK. She's also CEO and co-founder, responsible raw material, co-founder and ESG director of Terabotics. This is an Earth observation analytic company, expert of UK government critical minerals expert committee, and the other activities that related to sustainability and development in UK and globally. I can see that Dr. Gordon also has experience in Africa, America, South America, and other countries. She has also PhD in geochemistry and planetary science from Imperial College London in collaboration with the Natural History Museum London and the Open University UK, funded by the Janet Watson Scholarship, and Bachelor of Science from University of Glasgow. And she is also certified member of the Institute of Risk Management and Fellow Geological Society of London. She's also a visiting professor of Imperial College London and research associate in University of Johannesburg. Without further ado, I would like Dr. Sarah Gordon to deliver her presentation. The time is yours.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much. You know, it's a true honor and a privilege to be speaking with you here today on a topic that is so exciting and changing so quickly at the moment. Now, just in case anybody would like to follow along with the material and the slides that I'll be sharing, I've loaded it onto the Satala website. So if this is helpful to you, please do feel free to go onto our blog, and you'll see that it's the top blog that is there at the moment over here on the left-hand side. If you click on that, you'll be able to get access to all of these materials. Now, the reason why I say that is because there are lots of slides here. So unlike John, who was brilliant and very focused with his material, what I've prepared is more of a reference deck. So I'm going to start off my 30 minutes by looking at, okay, let's take a big step back and let's make sure that we truly understand what is meant by this thing called ESG. Some people refer to it as sustainability. So what do we actually mean by it? How is it changing? How is it assessed? If we've got time, I've got a little case study with regards to climate change that will hopefully build on some of what John was saying with regards to carbon credits, etc. And then finally, of course, I've added in some material as well about fraud within ESG, some of which is sometimes referred to as greenwashing. However, John has given us a fantastic grounding with regards to what all of that means. So those of you who are looking at the slide deck will think, wow, she's going to try and get through 70 slides in 30 minutes. Don't worry, I'm not going to. There's just a whole lot of reference material there for you, should you wish to go and get hold of it at a future date. Okay, so let's start off with what do we mean by this thing called ESG or sustainability, and how is it changing in the world? Because if there's one thing that is changing quickly right now, it is the global population's attitudes towards sustainability. So let me take you back in time. We're going to go back to the 1980s and to the United Nations. And in 1987, this is when we begin to see some of the most famous papers that were written on sustainable development. And it's back in these papers that we see the definition of sustainable development being coined as being development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Now, that definition still holds today. And when people are talking about ESG, when they're talking about sustainability, this is what we're meaning. We're meaning, let's not destroy the planet, be it environmentally or socially, so that our children have got nothing to live in. That's what we're talking about. But this has changed slightly in that no longer are we just talking about stopping bad stuff from happening. Now we're actually thinking, well, hang on, we're going through a big change, especially with regards to climate change. Can we use this change as an opportunity to make sure that we can distribute some of this wealth around the world? Now, John has already talked about some of this, but can we make sure that through sustainability, through ESG, we make sure that this is a power for good rather than a power for increasing the divisions that perhaps we see across the world? So what do we mean by sustainable development? Well, back in the 1980s, people referred to three pillars: social, environment, and economics. And what you can see on the slide here is that from a social perspective, we're really talking about everything from social mobility, so people being able to improve their own lives, all the way through to cultural preservation, through to empowerment of different social groups, etc. That's what we meant back in the 1980s. From an environmental perspective, lots of focus on biodiversity, the use of natural resources, and really making sure that we protect our air and our water and ensure that we're not polluting the planet. That's what we were talking about with regards to environment. Note, climate change was not one of the key topics that's there, because from a science perspective, we hadn't quite realized in the 1980s how quickly Earth's climate was changing. Then the economic side, here, we're not talking about personal wealth or how much money a company makes. From an economic perspective, we're talking about the distribution and use of resources. Okay, so we're talking about economics in a much broader sense. It's not just about profit. So these were the three areas of sustainable development that were typically referred to back in the 1980s. Now, in the 1990s, the world of finance really begins to come to the table. And this is where a gentleman called John Elkington really began to push the concept of the 3 Ps, or the triple bottom line. And what he meant by this, to be honest, was exactly the same as what people have been talking about in the 1980s. But he was talking about people, planet, and profit. Now, you will see that there is strong correlation between people and social, planet and environment, and profit and the economic side. And if you read the definitions here, you'll see that it's basically the same stuff. However, John Elkington came towards us from a financial perspective, whereas the sustainable development movement really came from people trying to push forward human rights, environmental awareness, etc. So they came from different disciplines with regards to understanding what do we mean by sustainability. Now, this word profit is a problem because everybody looks at that and thinks money, but of course that's not really what we mean. And so in the 2000s, we see people beginning to use the word prosperity rather than profit to try and broaden this out to say, no, this is distribution of wealth, etc. So we've got the 1980s sustainable development movement. We've got the beginnings of finance thinking, okay, we're not just measuring value in terms of cash in terms of money. We're also thinking about social capital. We're thinking about natural capital. That's really important. But what are we actually aiming at here? Now, there have been a number of big visions, big goals that have been set, but the most well-regarded, perhaps, are the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, John's already mentioned these. These were published by the United Nations in 2015. They are designed to be relevant for 15 years. So by 2030, all of these goals, they are big goals. They are really ambitious. So we should be eradicating poverty. We should be making sure that nobody is hungry. We should make sure that we all live in sustainable cities and communities. We should be making sure that we have peace and justice across the world. So everything is fair and equitable. And of course, we should be looking at things like climate action. So how do we get our heads around this big change that is going on across our planet at the moment? These are big, big goals. And it's something that has a huge amount of structure that sit behind all of these. There are thousands of metrics and targets that people have developed since 2015 to really begin to hold themselves to account, to say, how can they help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals? Now, one thing that the SDGs, which is how they're sometimes referred to, is really useful for, is showing the full breadth of sustainability. And this is important because sometimes when people hear the word sustainability, they think we are only talking about climate change. Now, you'll see here that climate change is only one of the 17 goals. There are many other areas that we need to consider. And the other thing we need to think about is, if we were only thinking about climate change and that was the only thing that we cared about, we could probably achieve what we need to do there. But it would most likely dramatically worsen poverty around the world. It could really badly impact on life on water, for example, along with a whole myriad of other reasons. So one of the biggest discussions that is happening, and actually a lot of the background behind a lot of the actions that have been taken place, is that when we are trying to put in place our climate change controls, be they proactive mitigations or reactive adaptations, we need to be making sure that we are not exacerbating some of the threats of the other areas that we have here. So we need to make sure that the energy transition, which is vital for climate action, is done in a just or a fair manner, and doesn't just make sure that the United States gets richer and everybody else gets poorer, for example. I'm not meaning to pick on the US. It could be the UK, it could be Europe, it could be Australia, it could be anywhere. But this is something here where the energy transition should be something that provides an opportunity for all parts of the world, and actually should provide more opportunity for the more developing countries that we have around the world. So how do we do this? The way through which we can really begin to address some of these sustainable development goals, or the mechanism, especially when we start to speak to financial people, is this thing called ESG. Now, ESG stands for environment, social, and governance. Will this term change with time? Yes. Sometimes organizations refer to this as being CSR, or corporate social responsibility. Some other organizations refer to it as being their license to operate. It doesn't matter what this is called. There are specific definitions for ESG, but ultimately, if we do ESG well, we will be improving sustainability as a whole. Now, what do we mean by environment, social, and governance? So environment is everything from the biodiversity and the land in which we live, through to how are we looking after our water, through to how are we managing our waste, through to climate change, etc. Okay. Social is an overlaps with a lot of the environmental aspects. So, for example, water is really important for the environmental side, but it's also important for people. As human beings, we have to have access to drinkable water. And so this is something here where the E, the S, and the G are not separate. They are very, very interconnected in terms of how we describe them. From a governance perspective, governance is probably the most difficult aspect to get our heads around, because it kind of means two things. Firstly, we're talking about the governance of the country in which we are working. So what is the regulatory environment? How robust is it, etc.? All of those aspects. But then secondly, we're talking about corporate governance. So how is an organization or a company actually run? What is the management style? What is the ethics of the business? How transparent are we? Do we actually pay our taxes? Things like that. So E, S, and G, they require skill sets and expertise that are very specific to those areas, but there is huge overlap between those three different areas, which sometimes causes confusion. Because if you say water to an environmental expert, they will be thinking and visualizing fish and rivers and things like that. Whereas if you say water to a social expert, they're probably not thinking about fish. They're probably thinking about people having access to water. So you've got to be able to see all of these key aspects from the perspective of multiple different people. So this diagram here, I find very useful. So environment, we're really talking about nature. Social, we're talking about people. And governance, we're actually talking about company culture. Okay, that's what we're really referring to here. Everything is interconnected. And what you've got on the right-hand side here are some key aspects of sustainability, of ESG, and where do they fit into those three areas of E, S, and G. One final concept to share with you on this, and this is the concept of materiality. Now, we're all auditors on the call today, or we all have our own expertise. And when somebody says material to you, in the world of, say, finance, we've got a very clear definition for what are the material risks that we would look for if we were auditing an organization. And that's fine. So it basically means, what are the important aspects that I need to go and take a look at? That if those risks happened or if something changed, it is going to have a significant impact on the organization and what's going on round about it. Now, that's great. The problem we have is that word material means something different to a social expert. It still means things that are important, but they have very different ways of arriving at what those material aspects are. Within finance, some organizations typically look at what's going on in the world round about us and how might it impact on us. Okay, so it's outside in. Whereas from a social aspect, people typically look at inside out. What are we doing as an organization that may positively or negatively impact on the world round about us? Now, this two-way looking, so inside out and outside in, this is called double materiality because you're looking at it in two directions. And dynamic double materiality just refers to the fact that it's constantly changing. You all know when you do a materiality assessment or you work out what is important for an organization, you're doing it based on the best available information you have on that day. If you then redo your assessment tomorrow, the answer might change. And so this is really important for us to be aware of, especially in the world of ESG, where things are changing very, very quickly. So ESG is interconnected. Historically, the three areas of E, S, and G have been dealt with separately. But what we're beginning to see now is everybody addressing ESG in a much more interconnected style. With all of this as well, of course, we've got a big shift in the world. So people are now very aware of what's happening with regards to our climate. You've got lots of discussions with regards to the circular economy, so therefore more responsible management of our natural resources, through to, okay, yeah, everything needs to be interconnected. So lots of change that is happening at the moment. One final aspect on this as well is that we need to think about the timeframes of the areas of threat and opportunity, or the risks that we're talking about within ESG. Traditional risk management is really good at thinking about the short, sharp risks. So the things that might happen over the next 12 months. And most financial regulations, etc., in the world are set up to say, okay, I will sign off on that statement of going concern to say, yes, we've got enough cash flow to say that in a year's time, we will still be an organization. Now that's lovely. But we all know that most organizations, they don't just think about the next 12 months. They think about the next 3 years, maybe even the next 5 years with regards to those areas of risk. And again, that's okay, but it's still very, very short term in terms of the time horizon of many of the areas of risk that we need to think about when we're talking about ESG. And so this is something where many of the ESG risks, especially with regards to climate change, we won't see the impact of those risks. We won't see if we are right in terms of our predictions of those risks for 30 years, even longer than that. So one of the big changes that you're seeing organizations going through is we need to get out of the mindset of just thinking that 3 years or 5 years is a long time. And instead, we need to be thinking, okay, if my organization is still here in 30 years' time, what does the world round about me look like? And are we actually prepared for that? So that then takes us out into these long time horizons. And that's one thing. But more importantly, it's not about when will those risks actually happen. Instead, more importantly, it is about at what point in time do I need to put those controls in place? So especially with regards to climate change, we need to see organizations putting controls or changing how they are operating now in order to be able to control the future in 30 years' time. And this is one of the really big problems that we have in ESG, because we're trying to convince ourselves, we're trying to convince others to believe us when we're saying, I think that in 30 years' time, this might happen. And this is based on some trends, some scenario analysis with huge uncertainty. So I don't really know what the future will hold. But I think that if we don't take this action, if we don't spend the money in this place, then we're going to have a big problem in the future. So if you're looking for an organization that is doing ESG well or taking, say, climate change seriously, you'd expect them to have a risk register with lots of very long-term risks on it. And then more importantly, against those risks, they would have a list of controls with an indication of, we're putting these ones in place now, because they need to start having their effect so that we can proactively manage that risk for the long term. Okay, so time horizons are something that is quite different in ESG compared to, say, normal business management that historically we've seen. So what else is changing? Well, climate change is real. We're seeing Antarctica melting. If we look at various different data sets, and each of these little pies that we have here, the color corresponds to temperature, so blue being cold and red being hot. I don't think anybody can dispute the change as we go from 1851 to 2020. The world, on average, is hotting up. Planet Earth is getting warmer. And with this as well, what we're seeing is that all of our projected scenarios, all of our projected anticipated models are coming true. And they're not just coming true. The problem we have is that the worst case scenarios are the ones that are coming true. So everybody's having to redo the science very quickly to say, what do we think the future might hold? Increasingly, society is expecting us to get a handle on climate change and then broader ESG as well. And the exciting thing that, of course, has happened more recently is that now the rules and the regulations are really coming through. Now, John's already referred to some of these. We've seen big changes in, say, US policy, and they've actually published items just in the last month referring to big updates in terms of how is the US actually going to combat different aspects of sustainability. Canada released something last week. And with regards to Europe, please don't try and read this slide because it is a nightmare. Within Europe, there's huge change that's going on at the moment. And if you think that that is bad, this slide here is a timeline. This is just for the mining sector. So this is just minerals and metals. And these are only some of the relevant guidelines, regulations, requirements that a mining company needs to be thinking about just with regards to ESG. So it is big, it is complicated, it is messy. Now, what I'd like to do now is just to take you into a bit of a case study. I'm going to go into one area of ESG, which is climate change, just to explore how complicated it is. And the reason I want to do this is because if we are to go and audit, or we're going to try and understand if a company is committing fraud, we actually have to understand what are we really looking for. So what does a good organization look for or look like? And then, of course, we can spot where somebody might be cheating the system or whatever the case might be. So climate change, masses of change that's happening at the moment. John referred to COP27, which is one of the global conferences that happened back in November in Egypt. A COP for climate change happens every year. Last year, COP26 took place in Scotland. And so I was lucky enough to go and be a part of that conference. And COP26 was when the world of finance really came to the table. Countries from around the globe endeavored to be able to put into a pot $100 billion that could be spent in developing countries to help manage climate change. And the world of private business actually pledged $1 trillion to help climate change. So we're talking huge sums of money. So therefore, is the potential for fraud? Absolutely. It is very, very clear. Now, within climate change, one of the aspects we have to think about is this thing called carbon. Now, when we mention carbon, we don't really just mean carbon dioxide. It is the world's media being lazy and using the word carbon to actually mean all of the emissions that are harmful to our planet. Kind of, with a few nuances. So when we're talking about emissions, we mean all of this stuff that's sitting here in the clouds of this diagram. When people are talking about carbon, they often refer to scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. And annoyingly, this is not as straightforward as it could be. Scope 1 emissions refers to everything that your company or your organization directly produces. Okay, so those are your scope 1 emissions. And normally they are fairly easy to calculate because you know what your companies actually produce. Okay, so scope 1 are usually quite easy. Scope 2 refers to all of the electricity, heating, etc., cooling that you might need to use in your organization. So that's what we mean by scope 2. And again, that's really easy to calculate because you're probably paying an electricity bill to somebody, and you can therefore find out how is that electricity generated. Is it generated from burning coal, or does it come from a hydroelectric plant? So what are the emissions associated with that? So scope 1 and scope 2 are relatively easy. Scope 3 is the really difficult one, but actually where the most difference can be made. Because scope 3 refers to everything from what is the carbon footprint associated with supplies that you need in order for your business to operate. all the way through to flying on aeroplanes, your employees commuting, and then into the output side, into where are your products actually used? And also, if you're, say, a bank, what's going on with your investments? So scope 3 is much more difficult, but much more interesting. Most organizations at the moment only disclose on their scope 1 and their scope 2, because those are the only scopes that they can reliably provide data on. Okay, so that's the difference between scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 with regards to emissions. There's a whole wealth of different standards and organizations out there that can help you do this, some of which require people to pay for, others don't. Some of them aren't regulated, and so therefore you can't necessarily say if everything is being done without fraud, for example. The other term that you'll hear people talking about a lot is net zero and carbon neutral. Now, they mostly mean us not pumping more emissions into the atmosphere, or making sure that where we do have to emit things like carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, etc., that we have some form of offset. So we are either paying somebody else or ourselves have created some form of scheme whereby we can sequester, which is where you capture carbon dioxide and lock it up. Now, that can be done by planting trees, which is a good thing anyway for biodiversity, or you can do it geologically, where you can actually form minerals, and so therefore it captures the carbon permanently. There is a lot of debate with regards to net zero and carbon neutral, and where organizations are saying that they're doing it, are they really doing it? It's a big area of confusion at the moment. There will be a lot of fraud in there. Some of it will be intentional. At the moment, a lot of it will be unintentional, because lots of organizations just don't quite know what they're doing yet. Now, to help all of this, one of the documents that was released last year is this thing called TCFD, or the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. It is a British document, but it forms the basis of what most other countries around the world are making use of at the moment. It uses a very simple structure, which consists of governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. And again, I've included in your slide decks lots of information on TCFD. This is important because most countries around the world are adopting this approach to climate change checks and balances. So it is an organization actually doing what it should do with regards to climate change. Now, what do we mean with regards to these areas? Well, the thing to remember is that when you're talking about climate change, again, you need to be able to bring together expertise from engineering, from environmental experts, from social experts, from accountants, from lawyers, and everybody will have their own perspective on what is important for climate change. The useful thing for us is that TCFD makes big use of risk management. And you can see that the word risk is used throughout this document. And so therefore, provided you can identify what are the potential risks, be they opportunities or threats, to your organization and posed by your organization with regards to climate change, and you can show what you're doing about it, that is basically you being compliant with TCFD. Now, the next few slides, don't worry, I'm not going to talk through them. There's lots of documentation out there which suggests what an organization might consider to be their physical risks with regards to climate change, as well as their transition risks. A transition risk is just a non-physical risk. So things like carbon pricing, for example, so buying carbon credits. And we also talk about opportunities as well. So there's lots and lots of items to think about here. Now, with regards to all of this, we need to remember that TCFD is actually written as a financial disclosure. So what you find is that organizations are having to bring together their accountants and their environmental experts to put together this disclosure. And I guarantee that in most organizations, the accountants and the environmental experts have never spoken to one another because they all have been working in very different parts of the organization. An accountant has lots to learn with regards to what do we mean by climate change, and the environmental expert has lots to learn about what is needed in a financial disclosure because they've never seen them before. So this is something that we really need to remember when we're talking about this thing called the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, TCFD, or to be honest, any form of climate change reporting. You need to bring together specialists who will never have worked together, okay, which is one of the key areas that we need to be able to deal with. Another aspect, just to quickly mention in passing, that is very useful is that within TCFD, there is big emphasis on using scenario analysis to try to understand what does the future hold with regards to climate change in your organization. Now, behind this, there's a huge amount of work that has already been done by the big banks around the world. And there is something called the Network for Greening the Financial System, NGFS, where you can go and get a whole load of data for free to help you understand your scenarios. Similarly, the World Bank has gone and done something the same. So we can bring all of this together and we can say, okay, when I'm running my scenarios, I can use or I can build my scenarios for my company on something that is credible around the world. And what you need to do there is bring together these recognized scenarios that have already been built for us with our own context and our own risks for our organizations to say, okay, so what do I need to change within my organization? The scenario analysis then allows you to say, okay, so what is it that we need to change within our organization? So what action do I expect my organization to be taking? And then how am I going to measure whether that action is working? So those are our metrics and targets. And then finally, how am I going to hold myself to account to say, yes, we're actually doing what we said we were going to do. So the outputs from TCFD, as you can see here, should be about true impact, true change with regards to climate change in an organization. It should not be somebody just ticking boxes because they are trying to be compliant with regards to requirements, okay? So TCFD and ESG regulation should be about true impact and change within an organization that you can see. It is not about somebody sitting there ticking boxes and saying, yes, I am compliant with lots of different rules and regulations. It's more meaningful than that. Now, with this, TCFD as a structure, the same structure is being used in lots of other regulations. So there's a new one called TNFD, or the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, okay, which uses the same structure. And what it allows us to do is say, number one, let's understand our risks, be they potential threats or opportunities, and what we can actually do about them. Having understood that, we then make a plan or a strategy, which we then measure our progress against using metrics and targets. And then we hold ourselves to account to make sure we're actually doing it through the governance that we construct. That is the whole structure behind ESG and sustainability, which is very similar to how we run organizations normally. It is no different. The difference is just that ESG is really messy. Okay, it's really complicated. It is full of conflicts where the social expert says one thing and the environmental expert says, no, this thing is more important. So what you're having to do the whole time is balance all of these areas. The rules with regards to ESG are not yet established because it's so new. So therefore, we are still trying to work out what does compliance actually mean. Okay, the world is evolving very, very, very quickly with regards to climate change. Now, final things that I just want to mention quickly before I hand back to our wonderful host actually was mostly covered by John, which is brilliant. And this is just very quickly with regards to ESG fraud, in line with what John has said. Yeah, it's in terms of breaches of different laws, regulations, and usually somebody saying that they're doing one thing, but actually they're doing something else. Within ESG, a lot of this is unintentional because people don't quite understand what they should be doing yet, rather than somebody intentionally breaching a particular area. With regards to the normal fraud triangle, is there pressure with regards to ESG? Yes, massive pressure to be able to do what is right within your organization. Is there opportunity with regards to fraud? Absolutely, because again, the world doesn't really understand what we're focused on at the moment. And then rationale, well, yeah, it's easier to cheat than actually take the really hard decision of putting in place some of these actions that we need. ESG means that most companies will make less profit. That is perhaps one of the biggest motivators for people to cheat or commit fraud with regards to ESG, because their profits will go down. Sustainability is not free. It's going to cost us a lot of money. But where we lose something in financial capital, we will gain value in social capital and in natural capital. So that's where we need to be looking at those three different aspects. Fraud risk is a growing area of focus for enforcement around the world. Does anybody do it really well yet? No. Everybody is struggling with this at the moment, primarily because there is not that core skill set or competency around the world in terms of what do we actually mean by ESG. There are three main types of ESG fraud. Either people manipulate their ESG data, and John's already talked about this, or we have greenwashing. And remember, greenwashing doesn't necessarily mean fraud. There's a big debate around this at the moment, and you could pick all of that apart. And then finally, there's actually many different examples of environment and social frauds. So things like human rights abuse, corruption, bribing officials, a company that says it's doing one thing and doing something else. So those traditionally would have been part of anti-bribery and corruption. Those different aspects of fraud, for example, could be rolled into what we're doing with regards to ESG. Again, so you've got overlaps that are going on there. Final few slides, I promise, Ido. How do we actually stop this? 10 suggestions. Number one, acknowledge that we need help. We need to bring in specialists who we've never worked with before. Acknowledge that there is no single standard or guideline that we can go to say this is what we want to be compliant with. It doesn't exist. We need to focus in on impact, not box ticking. So look for what the organization is actually doing, not the boxes that they are ticking. When you are looking at an organization, firstly, the senior leaders should understand all of the areas of ESG risks. They won't be experts, but they should be able to talk through what the ESG risks are. You should look for ESG being incorporated into governance. So there should be a sustainability committee or something like that at board level. You should begin to see that coming through. Ideally, there should be an ESG compliance and assurance framework. So within the third line of defense, within an organization or within the assurance framework, there should be experts who can deal with ESG, or contracts with third-party suppliers where they get the subject matter experts to come in. You need the specialists that are there. Look for metrics that are too good to be true. So somebody saying that they're going to be net zero by 2025, and they are a shipping company and they haven't done anything yet to change how they fuel their ships, that is probably greenwashing, because they'll never be able to do it. Finally, coming into here, use independent verifiable data sets, such as satellite imagery. We can now track a huge amount of change from space. You don't need to rely on a company to tell you what they're doing. We can see it. So from a regulator's perspective, we should be using this. Now, again, it is not free. It costs money to take pictures from space, and more importantly, it costs money to analyze those pictures and that data. But this is something that should be a fundamental tool for all of us when we're trying to say, is that ESG real? And finally, be open to learning. We do not know what all the answers are for ESG yet. We don't know what the rules are. So they are changing, and so we constantly need to learn. So with that, I will say thank you very much and hand back to our host. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your fantastic presentation, Dr. Gordon. I believe most of us hasn't been exposed to your data that present in your session today, and then it is very enjoyable to listen your explanation about history of ESG and your point of view. And then I take notes, some of them, that is climate change is real. Yeah, climate change is real. And then the emissions that harm our planet came from a lot of activities. So the internal auditors that not using application on their job, to audit job, they're using business travels. It also will increase, right? Increase the carbon in the sky. And then it is the company purpose is increase shareholder value, which also stakeholder value, because sometimes ESG issues affect their share prices, isn't it? People doesn't want to be affiliated or associated with a bad reputation company. So this helps, such you said before, it is help ESG issues is help the company to gain their social capital. All right, thank you very much. But again, for those who wants to ask Dr. Gordon, you can access and write into the Slido. Yeah, in the Slido, we will read some of your questions after the speaker presentations. Thank you, Dr. Gordon. Presenter ketiga kita pada hari ini adalah Bapak Stefanus Alexander Sianturi atau Pak Alex. Selamat pagi, Pak Alex. Pagi menjelang siang.
Selamat pagi.
Izin membacakan CV dari Pak Alex. Ya. Pak Stefanus Alex Sianturi, CFE. Beliau adalah Forensic and Integrity Services Partner pada Ernst & Young Indonesia atau EY. Beliau juga merupakan pengurus dari ACFE, Association of Certified Fraud Examiner, Chapter Indonesia. Beliau juga merupakan praktisi audit investigatif, audit forensik, business integrity risk review, compliance review, anti-fraud program and controls, and fraud risk management termasuk fraud risk assessment dan general audit. Pak Alex menyelesaikan S1 akuntansi dari University of Indonesia atau Universitas Indonesia dan master degree in forensic accounting dari University of Wollongong, Australia. Beliau juga merupakan Certified Public Accountant atau CPA dan Certified Fraud Examiner. Baik, tanpa memperpanjang kata, kami persilakan Pak Alexander Sianturi untuk menyampaikan materinya. Time is yours, Pak Alex.
Baik, terima kasih Pak Edo. Selamat siang Bapak Ibu sekalian. Pertama-tama saya mengucapkan terima kasih. Saya mewakili ACFE Indonesia Chapter untuk memaparkan topik yang sebenarnya sudah selesai. Karena udah ada dua pembicara sebelumnya. I think Sarah and John are really good in talking about ESG, and nothing more that I can say for this ESG, basically, yeah. But anyway, I have my duty to be fulfilled. So I will share my screen. Bisa ya ini ya.
Silakan Bapak.
Oke, sudah terlihat ya Pak Edo?
Oke, sudah terlihat. Iya. Mungkin bisa di slideshow, Bapak.
Ya, baik. Sekali lagi, terima kasih atas kesempatan diberikan kepada ACFE. Topiknya Fraud Universe Methodology in the Rise of ESG Issues. Sebenarnya kalau dilihat dari perspektif ACFE Indonesia, saya sendiri sebagai board member di sana, kita juga punya beberapa clues mengenai bagaimana isu-isu terkait dengan ESG dikaitkan dengan fraud gitu ya. Nah, kalau kita lihat mungkin secara singkat saja Bapak Ibu sekalian, karena beberapa topik tadi bagaimana pentingnya ESG dan bagaimana relevansinya terkait dengan fraud itu sudah cukup banyak dibahas. Tapi mungkin dari beberapa perspektif yang lainnya kalau boleh saya share kepada Bapak Ibu sekalian. Sebenarnya ESG ini atau sustainability ini kita membentuk sebagai sebuah ekosistem. Kenapa? Karena tadi yang disampaikan oleh Sarah dan John bahwa itu luar biasa. Mengenai ESG itu bukan main-main. Dampak dan impact-nya itu luar biasa. Dan yang menjadi rumit adalah tadi saya suka ya kata-katanya Gordon, you really touch to the right target ya. ESG is messy. Karena semuanya sekarang ngomong ESG gitu ya. Bahkan kita pun ngomongin ESG, jadi semakin rumit jadinya. Nah, karena begitu messinya ESG ini, jadi kita sampai nggak tahu nih mana yang mau kita fokuskan gitu. Dan fraud ada di dalamnya. Itu yang menjadi concern kita dan topik kita hari ini gitu ya. Jadi kalau kita berbicara bagaimana ESG itu benar-benar bisa mampu memberikan manfaat, kita melihat ESG sebagai ekosistem Bapak Ibu sekalian. Jadi kalau kita lihat juga bagaimana ESG itu terkait dengan corporate strategy. Ternyata tadi oke gitu ya, bahwa ESG itu mestinya masuk ke dalam bisnisnya kita gitu ya. Tapi sayangnya ini belum, jadi belum, kita masih silo. Kalaupun di organisasi manapun yang sudah berbicara ESG, itu challenge mereka adalah menerapkan ESG itu masuk ke dalam struktur yang ada, masuk ke dalam value chain yang ada, gitu ya, supply chain yang ada yang di dalam. Jadi supply chain itu bukan artinya procurement aja, tapi semua value chain. Makanya kita bilangnya value chain-nya kita itu mesti jelas. Jadi memasukkannya itu menjadi masalah. Kenapa? Karena ini bukan hal yang mudah dan baru muncul gitu ya. Dampaknya itu muncul dan dampaknya itu luas dan pressure-nya luar biasa. Nah, jadi sebagai sebuah negara kita pun mendapatkan pressure yang tinggi terkait dengan sustainability. Lalu pressure itu biasanya kan turun ke bawah gitu ya, ke kita sebagai warga negara dan juga ke korporasi, instansi, organisasi gitu. Jadi itu semakin membuat bahwa sustainability itu benar-benar menjadi sebuah hal yang benar-benar menjadi penting. Benefitnya apa? Jelas. Sebenarnya benefitnya jelas. Ya, benefitnya jelas. Tadi juga sudah sempat dibahas, jadi mungkin saya tidak masuk ke secara detail di sana. Nah, kalau kita lihat dari perspektif Bapak Ibu, bagaimana ESG-nya itu perspektifnya saat ini. Ini dilihat dari kondisi sekarang ya. ESG tadi sudah ada beberapa dibahas historinya seperti apa, lalu dengan berjalannya waktu itu menjadi sangat-sangat terpressure gitu ya. Lalu dengan adanya pandemi, kalau pandemi ini kan seperti semua orang seperti melakukan refleksi ya, bukan pijat refleksi maksud saya, refleksi diri gitu ya. Apa sih pandemi ini artinya buat kita? Dan ESG juga melihat hal yang sama. Ternyata ekspektasi karena ada pandemi itu, stakeholders itu lebih meningkat secara manajemen ya. Lalu ESG dan sustainable inclusive growth, jadi artinya benar-benar aspek ESG itu masuk ke dalam pertumbuhan dari organisasi menjadi sebuah hal-hal yang kritis untuk tentu saja untuk membangun trust. Nah, di sisi yang lain kalau investor juga kan pengennya berinvestasi karena kondisi sekarang itu semuanya berbicara mengenai misalnya carbon emission yang terkendali atau bahkan zero carbon emission gitu ya. Jadi investor akan berpikir bahwa sustainable growth dari organisasi harus mempertimbangkan ESG. Jadi harus gitu. Makanya sekarang ada green finance, ada green bonds kan gitu ya. Jadi artinya itu menyambung ke sananya. Nah, mereka juga pengen bahwa yang ESG-nya ini benar-benar investment approach-nya itu include ke dalam ESG itu mesti include ke dalam bagaimana mereka melakukan investasi. Kenapa? Pada dasarnya investor itu kan ingin ada return dan return-nya itu sustainable, sustain gitu ya. Maksudnya berkelanjutan. Nah, kalau itu artinya kalau dalam kondisi sekarang mereka harus mempertimbangkan ESG. Jadi dua aspek ini kita bisa lihat sesuatu yang sebenarnya match gitu ya. Itu sesuatu yang match. Nah, Journey-nya bagaimana? Tadi saya kira sudah cukup disampaikan juga, tapi yang kita bisa lihat ya, kalau saya boleh kutip dari beberapa diskusi-diskusi dan juga paper-paper dari banyak sekali tulisan ya. Sekarang journey-nya adalah companies are at the start of the ESG journey, including the integration of ESG into their company value chain. Jadi baru sekarang nih mereka mengintegrasikan, seperti saya sampaikan tadi, ESG itu dalam proses organisasi lah, paling gampangnya begitu. Companies value chain itu sebenarnya proses organisasi. Lalu ini baru gitu ya. Karena apa? Karena menarik juga tadi disampaikan, kalau ada organisasi yang mengatakan bahwa mereka kelihatannya sudah cukup advance terkait dengan ESG-nya, itu a big question mark gitu ya. Itu yang perlu dicek. Lalu partisipan dari yang ESG Journey ini berusaha mencoba melihat compliance dan integrity. Ini nggak bisa dihindari Bapak Ibu. ESG itu G-nya kan governance. Jadi environmental, social, and governance. Governance itu bicara tentang governance artinya tata kelola, artinya berbicara mengenai integrity issue. Kalau governance nggak bicara integrity issue, itu sebenarnya ESG tidak lengkap gitu ya. Kan di beberapa paper juga sudah banyak yang mengatakan begini, ESG-nya itu meninggalkan governance. Jadi governance-nya itu belakangan gitu ya. Karena orang sibuk mengukur climate change gitu ya. Sampai G-nya lupa gitu. Nah, cuman ditaruhnya kan di belakang ya, ESG kan G-nya belakangan gitu. Nanti bisa dilihat di paper-paper yang lain G-nya belakangan. Tapi mestinya dibacanya dalam satu kesatuan ya, Pak. Tapi ini memang yang kita hadapi sekarang. Lalu ESG has not yet been integrated into the overall corporate strategy. Nah, kalau belum masuk ke value chain-nya organisasi, bagaimana corporate strategy-nya juga bisa masuk? Tentu saja kan menjadi sulit ya. Bahwa value creation itu tidak diukur misalnya. Awareness sih ada, tapi mau ngukur tadi udah disampaikan sama Sarah juga. Kita butuh kerjasama dengan bidang-bidang yang tidak pernah kita kerjasama sebelumnya. Orang-orang yang mengerti isu climate change itu sebenarnya itu new combination of new discipline sebenarnya. Jadi kita mesti bekerja sama mereka. Jadi itu menjadi masih perjalanan. Lalu companies are aware that this is the changes dengan governance structure-nya mereka juga ada isu gitu. Sekarang pertanyaannya begini, ESG itu kalau di korporasi dikelola di mana sih Bapak Ibu sekalian? Atau di instansi pemerintah dikelola di mana? Kalau di PT masuknya ke Korsek paling ya. Mungkin ya di Korsek ya. Tapi ESG climate change emang ngomongin masalah corporate communication atau korkom gitu ya. Tidak hanya itu gitu ya. Hasil implementasi ESG perlu dikomunikasikan. Cara berkomunikasi ada, mungkin teman-teman di Korkom sangat ahli. Tapi masalah bagaimana matriks dari carbon emission itu another story loh. Jadi memang kombinasi disiplin ilmu yang banyak gitu ya. Nah, dari sini kita bisa melihat bahwa short term-nya masih fokusnya masih short term. Jadi fokusnya itu masih jangka pendek gitu ya. Jadi masih jangka pendek. Lalu governance structure-nya masih bingung lah, bisa dikatakan bingung, mau letakkan di mana. Lalu juga ada resiko-resiko yang muncul dan third party and supply chain risk are generally perceived as one of the main risk faced by the company. Nah, itu yang menjadi isu juga. Ada greenwashing. Greenwashing ini mungkin bahasa gampangnya kalau menurut saya begini ya. Kalau teman-teman di APIP biasanya kan paling nggak ada background accounting sama finance lah ya. Ya biasanya gitu ya. Nah, greenwashing ini paralelnya gitu ya, bahasa gampangnya. Tapi ini tadi menarik juga yang disampaikan oleh John sama Sarah bahwa nggak sederhana greenwashing. Betul. Saya mau coba simplify-nya kalau di laporan keuangan gitu. Kalau laporan keuangan disalah saji, kan itu namanya financial statement fraud gitu ya. Nah, greenwashing itu mirip seperti itu, tapi yang disalah sajikan itu matriks-matriks mengenai ESG. Sekarang pertanyaannya begini Bapak Ibu, saya juga jadi auditor lama dan sekarang bekerja di forensik. Financial statement fraud itu salah satu fraud yang paling ruwet dicarinya kan gitu ya. Kalau bribery, corruption bisa kita lihat dari hubungan. Tapi financial statement fraud ruwetnya apa? Karena kita disupport sama sistem gitu. Jadi mengcapture informasi keuangan kan menggunakan aplikasi. Nah, fraudnya ada di dalam sana. Nah, greenwashing kalau tidak menggunakan teknologi, maksud saya begini, ESG kalau kita tidak menggunakan teknologi, ESG reportingnya kacau pasti. pasti. Pertanyaannya, bagaimana kita mencari atau melakukan fraud detection di pelaporan mengenai ESG kalau kita tidak paham mengenai teknologi. Jadi ilustrasinya seperti itu. Kenapa itu greenwashing menjadi sulit? Karena apa? Karena nantinya informasi mengenai ESG akan di-capture secara sistem. Kan nggak mungkin tuh kita cari tukang catat karbonnya berapa, nggak mungkin. Itu udah kembali ke zaman dulu, buku besar gitu, pembukuan, bukan accounting. Nah, sekarang kan sudah ada teknologi. Jadi challenge-nya di situ, Bapak Ibu sekalian. Teknologi and reporting, nah itu masuk ke kotak yang paling kanan. Jadi artinya mau tidak mau kita menggunakan automated solution atau campuran antara automated sama manual. Ya pasti sebagian pasti akan ada yang hybrid lah, istilahnya hybrid, jadi manual sama otomasi digabung. Nah itu adalah alat bantu kita untuk meng-capture ESG information yang ada di organisasi kita. Dalam saat yang sama disitulah letak masalahnya pada saat kita mesti berhadapan dengan deteksi mengenai ESG fraud. Jadi itu yang akan kita hadapi. Oke, itu journey-nya. Challenge-nya clear purpose, jadi mesti ada jelas, jadi apa yang mau kita capai. Lalu kita lihat resikonya, what could go wrong itu resikonya seperti apa. Tadi sekilas sudah juga disampaikan oleh pemateri sebelumnya. Teknologi, reporting, monitoring harus ada, karena kalau tidak ada kita sudah pasti kita memiliki informasi mengenai ESG itu tidak akurat, tidak lengkap, tidak andal dan seterusnya. Sama seperti pelaporan keuangan, ya ilustrasinya begitu. Pelaporan keuangan saja kalau tidak ada didukung dengan teknologi reporting dan monitoring itu kacau. Apalagi ini, karena tadi udah dibilang Messi gitu ya. Messi ini bukan yang kemarin baru menang ya. Messi ini pakai Y gitu. Kalau itu pakai I ujungnya. Jadi warnanya bukan biru putih. Messi itu kacau balau lah pokoknya. Jadi bukan yang kemarin barusan menang dapat trofi, bukan. Jadi sangat-sangat Messi. Nah, governance adalah challenge-nya berikutnya. Governance, ya ESG-nya sendiri ada G-nya gitu ya. Governance-nya itu dalam aspek beragam gitu ya. Expertise tadi udah disampaikan. Jadi kita sekarang memiliki education gap. Kita berbicara ESG, tapi sebenarnya kita belum tahu persis. Tapi tadi bagus juga closing-nya Sarah. Learning-nya kita harus jalan. Saya pun masih belajar dalam ESG. Oke. Beberapa challenge in implementing ESG strategies ini kami kutip dari beberapa perusahaan-perusahaan yang besar. Pada dasarnya semua mengatakan perusahaan-perusahaan ini bukan perusahaan-perusahaan yang baru berdiri ya. Ini udah perusahaan yang tua gitu ya. Mereka pun challenge gitu ya menerapkan. Message-nya adalah kita atau organisasi yang ada di Indonesia pasti menghadapi challenge yang besar gitu. Jadi artinya mencari ESG fraud yang saat ini adalah mungkin yang paling mudah adalah kalau too good to be true. Ya, kalau too good to be true kan salah satu red flag ya untuk fraud risk gitu ya. Too good to be true biasanya tend to be not true gitu ya. Jadi artinya itu yang mungkin kita bisa capai bagaimana proses ESG ini pada saat kita mau melihat apakah ada fraud di dalamnya. Kalau saya sih sangat yakin, jadi bukan ini seuzon ya. Opportunity-nya begitu besar. Opportunity-nya begitu besar, lalu juga pressure-nya begitu tinggi. Dan akhirnya rasionalisasi dengan mudah dibentuk gitu ya kalau kita balik lagi ke fraud triangle gitu. Karena opportunity-nya begitu besar dan ESG perusahaan manapun, organisasi manapun yang mau membenahi instansinya untuk masuk ke dalam arena ESG pasti butuh capex yang besar, pasti nggak mungkin gitu ya. Secara global aja tadi John Pong juga mengatakan 20 juta dolar, 20 miliar dolar akan disupport Indonesia untuk energi transition. Artinya itu uang yang besar. Nah, kalau korporasi mau membenamkan ESG dalam value chain-nya mereka, pasti banyak perubahan kan? Banyak change management yang harus dikelola. Itu big capex gitu ya. Kalau sudah ada big capex, nah kita kan langsung yang para internal audit, APIP, ataupun para investigator langsung itu ya, ada bohlam di kepala kita, fraudnya pasti gede ini, gitu kan. Udah pasti gitu ya. Jadi opportunity-nya begitu besar. Nah, tadi udah disampaikan bagaimana roadmap mengenai reporting gitu ya, reporting untuk ESG. Yang saya pahami ISSB ini sebenarnya kaitannya ke COP26 yang di Glasgow kemarin, lalu dilanjutkan dengan COP27 yang di Egypt, lalu juga masuk ke ke konteks G20 yang di Bali. Sebenarnya globally kita secara global punya isu yang sama, gitu ya. Kita mungkin saya masuk ke sininya dulu ya. Isu yang sama di secara global adalah kita tidak memiliki standar yang sama. Jadi di B20 Integrity and Compliance Task Force, kebetulan saya dari EY mensupport ini di task force-nya B20. Dari hasil surveinya kami dari B20 ini adalah isu pertama itu masalah ESG. Nah, memang benar-benar itu ya, benar-benar isu yang sangat-sangat sensitif sekarang. Lalu isu yang besarnya di sana adalah kita belum memiliki standar pelaporan. Kalau tadi kan ada TCFD, ada GRI, ada macam-macam kan. Nah, sekarang dicoba dibuat standarisasi. Sama seperti pelaporan keuangan, Bapak Ibu. Saya coba mau menganalogikan. Pelaporan keuangan sekarang kita menganut IFRS kan. Jadi seragam. Jadi harmoni pelaporan keuangannya gitu. Supaya apa? Supaya siapapun yang membaca laporan mengenai laporan keuangan, atau dalam konteks ini siapapun yang membaca mengenai ESG report, kita paham. Kalau standarnya beda, tentu saja isu pertama adalah kita punya persepsi yang berbeda-beda gitu ya. Jadi bagus di standar ini, apakah cocok dengan bagus di standar yang satunya lagi? Dari survei yang ada, Bapak Ibu, itu ada 600 kurang lebih sekarang standar yang beredar mengenai ESG. Beberapa sudah merge, sudah oke gitu ya. Dan memang di sini di isunya B20 itu adalah pertama adalah kita mau mengimprove sustainable governance measures. Jadi governance measure-nya mesti di support dulu nih, karena kalau tidak nanti kita ya istilahnya acak-acakan gitu ya. Messinya makin kacau gitu ya. Jadi itu udah Messi terus makin kacau. Jadi double Messinya. Lalu yang kedua adalah optimize sustainable governance, compliance, disclosure, and monitoring. Jadi compliance disclosure-nya itu mesti standar sebenarnya. Kalau tidak standar, ini kita punya masalah. Tapi inilah yang sedang digarap secara global. Jadi artinya di sini kita bisa lihat IFRS Foundation itu membentuk standar ada dua, yaitu General Requirement sama Climate. Nah saat ini memang yang baru digarap itu yang climate-nya gitu ya. Climate-nya itu kan mestinya baru di I-nya saja, S sama G-nya belum. Karena memang ini bukan hal yang mudah. Dan rencananya kalau dikutip dari ISSB website itu di end of this year itu akan dirilis gitu standar ini. Paling tidak ini we are going to the right direction lah. Jadi kita punya standar yang bisa dipakai secara global. Nah, challenge beyond sustainability reporting. Sebenarnya ini juga, seperti tadi sudah disampaikan, no end-to-end approach to ESG. Jadi ini mungkin ini masalahnya begini ya. Karena standarnya belum jelas gitu ya. Bagaimana sih standar yang mau dicapai? Kalau laporan keuangan standarnya udah jelas. Jadi bagaimana action dari korporasi, organisasi maupun instansi publik, kita udah tahu gitu mau buat apa. Karena yang diharapkan sudah tahu kan gitu. Karena standar kita masih beragam, jadi approach-nya itu masih on off gitu ya. Nah, kadang-kadang kita memilih standar yang mungkin potentially favorable ke kita. Bisa jadi seperti itu gitu ya. Jadi kita kan ya tentu saja lah kalau standarnya masih ada berlaku dan itu bagus buat kita, ngapain kita pakai standar yang nyusahin kita kan gitu. Itu sih normal gitu. Jadi itu yang menjadi penting. Masih silo ESG management nama inconsistent operationalization-nya. Lalu unavailable, unreliable, scattered data across organisasi. Nah tadi kalau kita tidak menggunakan teknologi untuk mengcapture informasi mengenai ESG implementation, kita susah pasti. Inkonsistensi di sistem, proses, sama kontrolnya. Itu resiko-resikonya. Lalu, lack of internal capabilities on advanced data analytics. Nggak ada cara lain, Bapak Ibu. Harus kita support dari awal penggunaan analytics pada saat kita menerapkan ESG. Dengan begitu, aspek yang kita bahas hari ini mengenai ESG fraud, kita punya tempat untuk mencoba mencari gitu. Kalau kan kebayangnya kalau Bapak Ibu sebagai internal auditor maupun sebagai investigator mau memeriksa tapi datanya nggak ada. Datanya nggak ada yang bisa dipegang. Kita tahu ini potensi masalah, tapi kita tidak tahu ukuran yang benarnya apa. Kan rusak jadinya ya. Ada sesuatu tapi kita nggak bisa berbuat apa-apa. Jadi artinya harus ada penggunaan analytics yang semakin dikedepankan. Karena itu manfaatnya begitu besar untuk monitoring, untuk investigasi, dan untuk improvement berikutnya. Jadi cepat-cepat mesti membenamkan analitik di dalam ESG reporting. Saya kira ini tidak perlu dibahas, tadi sudah dibahas oleh Sarah kalau nggak salah. Jadi beberapa country itu sudah memiliki jurisdiksi. Nah, di Indonesia sudah ada juga. Jadi di 12 November kemarin Kementerian Keuangan mengeluarkan ESG framework. Nah, ESG framework ini memang fokusnya masih ke infrastructure financing. Tapi paling tidak, Bapak Ibu, ini biasakan bisa kita jadikan pola ya. Bagaimana kita bisa menggunakan framework ini untuk misalnya sektor yang lain. Nah, ini kurang lebih roadmap-nya dan juga ESG standarnya seperti apa. Nah, memang balik lagi, G-nya memang ditaruh di belakangan. Masalah leadership dan risk and control itu taruhnya di belakangan. Semoga ini bukan berarti tidak berperan gitu ya. Tapi saya melihatnya mestinya satu kesatuan. ESG tanpa G dengan benar kita forget it lah ya. Kayak misalnya laporan keuangan kan seolah-olah ya kita kan cuma nyatat accounting, tapi behind itu apa sih Bapak Ibu? Integrity loh. Behind itu kan integrity yang diterapkan. Kalau nyatanya acak-acakan atau sengaja diacak-acak, kan kacau gitu ya. Jadi integrity itu sebenarnya the heart-nya gitu ya. Tapi paling tidak Bapak Ibu, jika kita mau melihat bagaimana framework yang sudah dibangun, saya kira ini bisa masuk ke ke sumber yang kami tuliskan di sini juga untuk mempelajari lebih lanjut. Jadi sudah ada framework yang sudah kita bangun. Paling tidak, kalau nggak salah ini base-nya beberapa standar. Salah satunya GRI dari World Bank, juga dari World Economic Forum. Itu jadi combine standar yang coba dibangun. Saya kira ini bagus sekali untuk menjadi reference awal pada saat kita berbicara mengenai ESG framework. Dan balik lagi, kita berpikirnya sebagai APIP untuk melihat aspek fraudnya itu bisa kita lihat di dalam. Nah, esensinya sebenarnya governance, integrity, and compliance sebenarnya. Itu yang perlu dilihat. Nah, ngomong-ngomong tentang integrity, Bapak Ibu, saya cuma mau highlight bagaimana persepsi mengenai integrity secara global. Ini kebetulan surveinya EY saya pakai. Nggak mungkin saya pakai survei dari toko sebelah gitu. Saya pasti pakai surveinya SCV dan EY. Nah, di sini kita berbicara unethical behavior, ternyata itu menjadi hal yang serius gitu ya. Lalu di sini ada dikatakan 42% global board member agree that unethical behavior in senior or high performer is tolerated in their organization. Jadi 42% board member secara global tuh masih ya nggak apa-apa deh kalau yang melakukan itu orang-orang kami yang sebenarnya jagoannya gitu. Nah ini kan bahaya ya. Jadi board membernya itu memaafkan istilahnya ya gitu ya. Lalu di emerging market, nah Indonesia termasuk emerging market, agree that unethical behavior in their organization is often tolerated when the people involved are senior or high performer. Jadi kalau pelakunya itu yang senior management, kecenderungan para pengawasnya, board member ini berarti pengawas ya, ini di settingnya one tier system ya, cenderungnya nggak apa-apa deh gitu. Jadi ini bahaya. Ini saya cuma mau mengawinkan situasi ESG saat ini dengan bagaimana perspektif masalah integrity dari para board member secara global. Nah, global board member 40% will be prepared. Nah, ini lebih seram lagi menurut saya. 40% dari para board member mereka bersedia mislead itu apa ya bahasa Indonesianya ya? Menyasar, membuat para external party itu menjadi menipu lah, tanda kutip bahasa ini menipu, to mislead external party. Siapa external partinya? Auditor, mungkin termasuk APIP nih, jadi termasuk kita juga potensially bisa ditipu, dan juga regulator. Nah ini kan gawat ya. Jadi to improve their career progression or remuneration. Jadi kalau kita masuk ke masalah opportunity dan juga pressure, saya kira di sana besar sekali gitu ya kesempatan yang muncul, sehingga bagaimana perspektif mengenai mislead para pihak-pihak external parties. Karena kan kalau ESG kan kita akhirnya butuh external parties dong untuk mensertify kan. Karena kan sekarang sudah ada POJK-nya nih Bapak Ibu sekalian mengenai sustainability reporting. POJK untuk yang perusahaan go public mereka harus menerbitkan SR. SR-nya itu biasanya diaudit. Nah, kalau lihat ini berarti auditornya bisa ditipu gitu ya. Jadi artinya perlu hati-hati. Jadi kita perlu lihat bahwa ESG sendiri sebagai ekosistem yang masih kacau balau atau messy, itu kita punya isu masalah integrity di sana. Lalu kalau kita balik lagi bagaimana sikap integrity dari para pemangku kepentingan pun tidak baik gitu ya. Jadi artinya ini kita perlu hati-hati sebagai orang yang berada di katakanlah kalau di APIP berarti menjadi third line-nya kita sebagai third line role-nya, lalu juga dari perspektif sebagai auditor. Jadi ini adalah masalah yang kita hadapi. ESG fraud kalau saya ambil dari SCFP ini adalah paper dari SCFP. Definisinya itu adalah fraud committed internally by management or employee or externally by parties outside organization, bisa vendor, kontraktor, customer, dan juga third party lainnya, that often involve an intentional act to deceive others by reporting of false and misleading ESG information. Mirip seperti pelaporan keuangan gitu ya. Jadi misleading financial information. Macam-macam, bisa harvest mixing misalnya. Ini tergantung ya, kalau perusahaan yang sudah melaporkan ESG-nya, dia akan melaporkan environmental related initiative. Dia bilang dia memanen dari sumber-sumber yang bertanggung jawab, biasanya istilahnya responsible source gitu ya. Bisa jadi itu dicampur, bisa juga gitu ya. Atau environmental standard manipulation, bisa juga. Inflated carbon credit value. Lalu jurisdictional bribery, itu terkait dengan environmental related fraud. Lalu social tentu saja berbicara mengenai labor, berbicara mengenai diversity, equality, and inclusiveness, DE&I. Biasanya ini masalah gender equality, lalu kita tidak ada masalah diskriminasi. Nah, itu kan biasanya dilaporkan. Itu bisa jadi menjadi pelaporan yang tidak baik. Atau governance related fraud, misalnya misrepresentation atau underreporting of suspicious activity. Karena di governance ini terkait biasanya hal-hal yang fraud, bribery, and corruption. Lalu juga masalah ada extortion, masalah juga monopoli, itu juga masuk ke dalam governance issue, atau illegal tax shelter atau underreporting, itu termasuk di sisi governance-nya. Ini kurang lebih adalah hal-hal yang dicakup di papernya. Jadi Bapak Ibu silakan bisa melihat di paper yang dirilis oleh SCFP dan bekerja sama dengan GT atau Grant Thornton. Impact-nya sebenarnya sama ya Bapak Ibu. Jadi ada financial risk, tentu saja nantinya ini bisa berdampak kalau misalnya pressure-nya itu kalau mereka sudah masuk ke dalam misalnya green financing. Tentu saja kan mesti melaporkan hal-hal yang baik gitu ya. Jadi ada financial risk di sana. Reputational risk jelas, karena mestinya kalau ESG reporting-nya itu tend to be fraudulent, mestinya ini menjadi reputational risk. Jadi harus benar-benar hati-hati. Karena kalau udah reputasinya rusak, organisasi itu bisa hancur. Compliance risk tentu saja karena ESG ini sebenarnya kalau kita melihat katakanlah limbah gitu ya, itu ada loh. Sudah pasti ada aturannya kan. Ada aturan di daerahnya, ada undang-undangnya bagaimana pengelolaan limbah. Jadi kalau mereka melaporkan sesuatu yang seolah-olah baik terkait dengan pengelolaan limbah, itu mereka ada isu in compliance mengenai regulasi. Jadi bisa saja faktornya ke kriminal gitu ya. Nah, kalau kita lihat, kalau ini saya dari perspektif dari SCFP ya Bapak Ibu. Jadi biasanya SCFP itu mengeluarkan fraud 3, biasanya corruption, asset misappropriation, dan financial statement fraud. Ini yang paling umum. Lalu ini dimasukkan satu lagi area yang non financial reporting fraud. Karena ESG biasanya non financial reporting. Misalnya false labeling or advertising. Contoh-contohnya ya. Lalu false disclosure or representation, false or disingenuous certification or pledges. Jadi artinya kita meminta pihak ketiga untuk mensertify, tapi ternyata ini bukan bukan pihak ketiga yang cukup qualified, atau kita membayar pihak ketiganya supaya sertifikasinya keluar, macam-macam gitu. Atau failure to disclose or report. Jadi ini adalah non-financial reporting fraud yang juga menjadi aspek yang perlu kita sadari gitu ya, terkait dengan ESG implementation, baik itu di reportingnya maupun di operasionalisasi di perusahaan. Nah, akhirnya kita juga berbicara mengenai integrity, Bapak Ibu. Tadi saya sudah sempat sampaikan. Karena sekarang yang menjadi penting adalah kita lihat tadi ya bagaimana kacau balaunya ESG ini. Integrity menjadi hal yang penting yang ada di tengahnya yang harus dijaga, bahwa apa yang kita lakukan itu benar-benar valid, dasarnya ada, dan itu benar-benar laporan kita yang secara natural itu true gitu. Jadi bukan no longer about making profit, but how profit are being made. Dan ini juga menjadi penting. Jadi ini adalah ngomong masalah integrity. Not enough to be compliant, but imperative to show social and environmental impact of a business. Tadi bicara impact juga ya. Jadi impact-nya apa gitu. Fulfilling ESG standard becomes a prerequisite for getting access to capital, talent, and market. Nah, ini yang juga tadi saya sampaikan bahwa ESG standard sekarang semakin diminta oleh banyak pihak gitu ya. Kalau kita butuh capital injection atau capital financing, tentu saja ESG menjadi pertanyaan. Talent, sekarang para calon karyawan itu akan berpikir, apakah perusahaan di tempat mereka bekerja itu concern mengenai masalah lingkungan gitu ya. Concern nggak masalah lingkungan? Mereka akan memilih di organisasi yang concern masalah lingkungan. Jadi artinya talent pool-nya itu akan juga mencari perusahaan-perusahaan yang benar-benar concern mengenai ESG. Lalu tentu saja pasar secara umum sudah pasti. Nah, yang perlu dibentuk dalam ESG ini bagaimana integrity ini kita jaga. Jadi artinya kita perlu elemen dari governance. Governance dalam arti tata kelola untuk ESG secara keseluruhan. Yang di dalam ESG pun ada tata kelola gitu. Jadi sebenarnya governance-nya itu the heart ya, the heart of the ESG implementation. Lalu perlunya ada pengendalian yang benar-benar cukup untuk memastikan bahwa semua informasi itu bisa di-capture. Semua informasi yang mengenai ESG implementation itu kita ada proses and control-nya. Dan membentuk culture, Bapak Ibu. Dan ini tentu saja memang dengan adanya governance, dengan menerapkan bagaimana kontrol itu in place, itu kita membangun culture gitu ya. Nah, yang menjadi menarik adalah bagaimana kita ngejagainya, bagaimana kita memonitoring, bagaimana memantaunya, bagaimana kita membuat action item untuk improvement. Kita perlu data, Bapak Ibu. Kita perlu data. Kalau tidak ada data, bagaimana kita memastikan apa yang kita lakukan ini cukup gitu. Makanya data insight itu menjadi penting. Nah, data insight ini balik lagi seperti saya sampaikan sebelumnya harus didukung dengan teknologi. Data insight itu harus bisa benar-benar tercapture dari kontrol yang kita bentuk. Jadi kontrolnya pun sudah mengikutsertakan penggunaan teknologi supaya kita punya dashboard untuk melihat implementasi dari ESG tersebut. Dengan begini, sebenarnya kita bisa melihat bahwa kalaupun ada pressure, kalaupun ada hal-hal yang perlu kita laporkan, kita benar-benar mencoba melaporkan ini dengan sikap yang benar-benar penuh dengan integritas. Itu harapannya seperti itu. Kaitan ke money laundering ini juga cukup dekat, Bapak Ibu sekalian. Kenapa? Karena ingat, ESG inisiatif akan membutuhkan capex yang begitu luar biasa. Para pelaku laundering, para launderer, money launderer itu melihat kesempatan ini loh. Jangan lupa, dia bisa ikut serta di sini. Dengan segala macam cara, dia bisa masuk ke pasar modal, bisa masuk ke pasar keuangan. Jadi seolah-olah dia membersihkan hasil proceed of crime-nya mereka. Akhirnya bersih dong karena sudah masuk kegiatan ESG kan gitu. Jadi kita juga perlu aware, ini sebagai awareness saja. Lalu kalau di PPATK juga sudah ada yang namanya mereka juga concern ya, green financing, money laundering. Jadi benar-benar green financing itu isu money launderingnya gede. Ya. Ini saya kira tadi udah sempat dibahas, sudah ada kasus-kasus gitu ya. Jadi ya di Indonesia mungkin ya kalau ditelusur-telusur, kalau ada yang mau meriksa pasti kita dapat gitu ya, tapi mungkin belum masuk ke coverage media secara luas. Gitu ya. Apa yang kita mau bisa lakukan sebagai closing, Bapak Ibu? Pak, pastikan bahwa ESG framework itu mempertimbangkan fraud risk management strategi. Kenapa? Karena ESG kan ada G-nya gitu ya. Jangan lupa G-nya. Jangan sampai ini karena ditaruh di belakang akhirnya mungkin penerapannya entar gitu ya. Jangan. Itu salah gitu ya. Menurut saya salah. Sama seperti risk management, Bapak Ibu. Kalau risk management tidak mempertimbangkan fraud risk, pasti gawat menurut saya. Karena perusahaan mana yang salah ngambil keputusan itu benar-benar hancur. Yang banyak itu perusahaan karena fraud ya hancurnya kan. Kalau salah ngambil keputusan mah biasa kan gitu ya. Namanya juga business decision gitu ya. Creating and protecting sustainable long term value. Jadi benar-benar kita berbicara long term value nih. Nah, ini perlu kita kaji ulang. Lalu ensuring your board is equipped to deliver against ESG goal. Jadi pimpinan kita udah paham belum mengenai ESG? Ya tahu sih ESG apa, tapi tahu nggak bahwa ini begitu kacau balaunya sekarang gitu ya. Jadi perlu tahu gitu ya. Integrating data analytics for trusted ESG performance reporting. Jadi tidak bisa tidak mengintegrasikan analytics. Karena ini adalah cara kita untuk memastikan. Karena kalau ditanya nanti mana dasarnya, kalau kita sudah punya sistem informasi untuk mengcapture apa yang kita lakukan, kita enak gitu ya. Developing consistent, comparable, and interoperable taxonomy. Sebenarnya ini mengenai reporting. Sekarang ini adalah effort secara global bahwa secara reporting kita akan membenahi supaya semua punya persepsi yang sama pada saat kita berbicara E, berbicara S, berbicara G. Kurang lebih itu Pak Edo yang saya mau sampaikan singkat dari SCP di sharing di kesempatan ini. Terima kasih.
Baik, terima kasih Pak Alex atas presentasinya, luar biasa komprehensif Pak ya. Jadi tadi Pak Alex menyampaikan bahwa hati-hati ESG ini karena messy gitu ya, maka opportunity besar dan rasionalisasi juga besar. Kalau ganteri ini tend to fraud-nya tinggi ya Pak ya. Lalu automated solution atau teknologi ini harus digunakan karena kita harus mengarah ke data analytics ya. Sekarang susah kalau kita menggunakan manual lagi gitu ya. Dan kita harus membangun data culture. Baik, terima kasih Pak Alex Sianturi. We begin to the question and answer. I have three questions actually for each speakers. The first question is for Dr. Fong, related to the greenwashing. Whether we could find these greenwashing activities in the financial reports right now, apart from the standard that has been published nowadays, and how to detect such wrongdoings. Okay, can you hear me clearly, Dr. Fong?
Yeah, thank you question, Pak Edo. Before I say anything, I need to cover myself.
Okay.
I will not talk about a company because saya tidak mau masuk di daftar hitam. Okay.
All right.
I don't want to be blacklisted in Indonesia. I will not refer to a company, but I'll refer to the sustainability report that I've seen right now in Indonesia. All right. There are some reports that says that they are very conscious of being environmental friendly. They're very conscious about sustainability, but they do not have a director of sustainability. So I want to have a question on that. Second thing is that I hear some companies say that we are very socially conscious. We give a lot of charity funds to orphanages. But I want to ask the question, how many hours do they train their staff? How many hours do they allow their staff to be developed personally? If you do not even have 100 hours per year, you are not socially conscious to your staff. Okay, so please check that. The third thing is that in our board of directors, we have gender inclusion, we have many things that are very, the leadership includes female directors, etc., and even independent directors. That is the governance, okay? So I'll talk about environment, I'll talk about social, now I'll talk about example of governance. I want to ask this question. Have we ever done a test to check what is the director's remuneration? Gaji mereka ada berapa, even though the company is not performing well. Tapi gaji mereka masih naik. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is another thing about governance. So this is greenwashing, telling me all the stories about how great you are, but the fundamental is this. Kalau perusahaan semua profitabilitas jatuh, kenapa gaji direktur masih naik? Okay.
All right.
So these are just examples. I can name many more, but I want to let other panelists have their chance to speak. Thank you, Pak Ido.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Fong. Dr. Fong said that it is so the things, the wrongdoing is really shown in the financial reports. At least the indication of the greenwashing. Thank you, Dr. Fong. And then for the Dr. Gordon, I would like to ask from the standards, from the standards ESG issues. What do you think about? What do you think the best way to regulate this kind of ESG? Mr. Alex said that there are 600 standards. That is, it is merged, but not all of them. How is the best way to regulate the ESG issues?
Yeah, thank you very, very, very much for that, Ido. And this is a great question because it's very difficult to answer. I get asked this a lot, especially by governments and different industry bodies around the world. And everybody wants me to say, just use this. But unfortunately, that hasn't been developed. And also, whilst the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals is a really good framework, it's not detailed enough to then say, okay, but what should a company specifically be looking for? So therefore, what you need something which is broad, like the Sustainable Development Goals, and there are others that are out there, but then something that is specific to that sector. So again, you're narrowing the context. Now, within, say, just take the mining sector, there are at least 130 different standards or guidelines or something that are relevant with regards to just digging material out of the ground and then processing it into metal, etc. And so what's happening at the moment is a lot of countries are looking at one another and saying, okay, who's got the best kind of standard that's out there? Because unfortunately, each industry body, each country has written their standards independently of one another. So they haven't worked together. They've written these standards independently. And the standards have been written for different purposes. So if I held the pen on a standard and I'm an environmental expert, my intention of that standard is going to be very environmentally focused. Whereas if I hold the pen on, say, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, I'm probably an accountant. And so the intention of that standard is financial quality, etc. So this is the problem we have, is the standards have been written from different perspectives for different purposes. The ultimate goal is the same. The ultimate goal is a sustainable world, but the methods through which we expect to get there are ever so slightly different. So, solutions. from a mining perspective, what is increasingly happening is, for example, the Canadian-driven standard, which is called Towards Sustainable Mining, or TSM, is very focused on the impact of sustainability, which is great. So it's looking at what are you actually trying to create. It doesn't say, do you have a human rights policy? Tick. It says, how are you actually looking after human rights of your external communities as well as your staff? So to John's point, how are you looking after your staff? Are you providing them with the training? Do they have ablution facilities, etc.? All of those aspects. So it's focused on impact. And because the TSM, or Towards Sustainable Mining standard, is focused on impact, it's now being adopted in Australia. It's been adopted by the London Metal Exchange, etc. So you can see people are constantly looking around for who's developed something that is working. And I think it might work in my context. So ultimately, there is no single standard, unfortunately, but there's lots of really good material out there that lots of people have effectively been testing. So when, from a country perspective, we're trying to select what do we want to use, we can bring in the ESG experts and say, where should I start? What should I be pulling together? And then what you probably need to do is, instead of saying, we expect everybody to be compliant with this, you might want to say, we'd expect you to be compliant with something like or equivalent to these kind of standards. So then you get a broad, all-encompassing sustainability. And then you might have the industry-specific standards in there as well. Hopefully that makes sense,
Yeah, thank you. So find the right indicators. I mean, like you said, the impact of the ESG is really important, isn't it? Yeah. Apart from
absolutely.
law of standards, we can rely on one standard, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Gordon. And then for Mr. Alex, Pak Alex, saya mau bertanya, apakah internal audit saat ini, ya Pak ya, di Indonesia ini sudah cukup capable dalam tackling isu tentang ESG ini, dari kompetensi maupun dari infrastruktur yang mereka punyai saat ini, baik di pemerintahan maupun di luar pemerintahan, Bapak.
Terima kasih Pak Edo. Rasanya sulit untuk ngejawabnya ya, karena takutnya ntar internal auditornya marah sama saya. Tapi begini, rasanya sih kalau melihat bagaimana ESG saat ini ada, at least dari two other panelists, bagaimana kita bisa melihat apa yang terjadi, kita bisa mengukur diri kita apakah kita sudah up to date skill gitu ya, untuk mengatakan bahwa kita mampu untuk melakukan audit terhadap ESG gitu. Itu yang menjadi pertanyaan besarnya gitu. Nah, challenge-nya adalah kita perlu paham bahwa ESG itu adalah multidisiplin. Sama seperti audit pun ya, audit di dalam operasional pun kan juga multidisiplin gitu ya. Tidak melulu talking about financial, tapi juga yang non financial aspek. Kalau kita pada saat melakukan audit untuk di operasional. Nah, ESG juga begitu gitu. Jadi ini kan multidisiplin yang harus kita kembangkan. Jadi tim audit kita menjadi pertanyaan buat kita, apakah kita sudah punya cukup kompetensi dari aspek itu dulu gitu. Rasanya sih to that sense mungkin akan sangat variatif, tapi bisa juga kalau saya melihat, saya mungkin membayangkan dengan tim saya sendiri gitu ya, pada saat ada investigasi mengenai ESG, pasti challenge, dan itu belum tentu semua knowledge kita miliki. Jadi kita perlu mencari support dengan kalau di tempat saya maksudnya di EY, kita punya tim yang ngurusin climate change and sustainability. Ada timnya gitu, tim yang yang sifatnya memberikan assurance dan juga advisory. Kalau memang kita sedang menangani ESG fraud, sudah pasti kita akan berkolaborasi. Jadi artinya kita mesti juga bekerja sama dengan other expert yang benar-benar relevan ke ESG. Saya kira itu yang bisa saya jawab, Pak Edo. Kasih.
Baik, terima kasih Pak Alex. Selanjutnya, next we want to read a few questions from the audience. The first question is from Mr. Swatno. In the market mechanism, there are no different prices in green sector and non-green sector. We tend to financing green and not greening finance. How internal audit should react to these issues from the risk management perspective? I think this will be addressed by Dr. Gordon. Can you address this question, Dr. Gordon?
Yeah, thank you very much, Ido. And I'm sure that maybe Alex and John have thoughts on this as well.
Okay.
With regards to green financing and what is considered to be green financing, this is of course changing quite quickly at the moment. And historically, there's been lots of room for people cheating, i.e. fraud, with regards to what they're calling green financing. So i.e. where people say, we can invest in this and actually it has no positive impact with regards to sustainability. Of course, that is changing because the scrutiny of the world is improving with regards to what we're looking at. Also, another aspect that is changing as well is that what people consider to be included within that green financing. So things, again, like mining. So we need all of those minerals and metals for the wind turbines, the electric vehicles, the batteries. But you won't find mining in a green fund. And that's something which is beginning to change. You're beginning to see people go, well, hang on, if you can prove that you are extracting those materials in a responsible manner, and there's a net benefit there to society and environment. Granted, you're going to have to destroy some of the environment while you are mining, but you can view the mining project as a long-term construction project for the future. If that is your business model and that is what you're actually delivering on, okay, that might give you access to more of the green finance. So you're seeing quite big changes with regards to how different sectors are actually undertaking their business, because it gives them access to capital, because people are reevaluating what are the risks associated with those activities. You've also seen as well, one of the problems though with green financing and people assessing what could be included or what could be eligible for green funds are the ESG ratings organizations. Unlike the financial ratings organizations, which are regulated to a certain extent, there's no regulation with regards to ESG ratings. And as a result, and I'm very open to having these discussions with the ESG ratings organizations, at the moment, it is chaos. And so personally, I wouldn't trust what an ESG ratings organization says about a company. Quite often you can compare those ratings from one company or for the same company from one ratings organizations to another, and they will give you a different answer. And so therefore, what it means is if you're an investor or you're somebody with a green fund, you need to be more imaginative with regards to how you're doing your due diligence on a company. You can't rely on the normal tools such as ratings for a company to say, yes, that's the one I want to invest in. If you're only relying on ESG companies at the moment, you're not doing a very good job. And it means as well that you may be investing your green funds in something that's not necessarily green. The final thing there as well, though, is that so green bonds, you've seen a lot of, say, pharmaceutical companies begin to raise money on green bonds. So then you say, well, what's the pharmaceutical company have to do with sustainability? Well, the manner through which they actually act, the fact that they might make meds, give access to all for certain types of medicine, and then also how much water, for example, that they use in their activities. The fact that they say, right, we're going to raise money through a green bond, then acts as a mechanism of accountability and governance with regards to how they run their company. And it's great because what it means is if they don't deliver on their sustainability targets, they lose their financing. So there's a great impetus there for them to actually deliver on what they're saying. Now, I realize that doesn't necessarily fully answer the question, but hopefully that provides a bit more context in terms of the landscape of green financing and what is changing at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gordon. The most important thing is don't mislead the company purpose, is it? To improve or increase shareholder value. All right, the second question is from Anissa R. Indonesia has set new and ambitious carbon emission. How to ensure this goal is realized or achieved in the context of internal auditors? What internal auditors could do? And do you think Indonesian internal auditors is ready to help ensure that? Maybe Dr. Fong can give your thought about this. Oh, yeah.
Wonderful question. Thank you so much. And whoever asked this question, I want you to listen very carefully. And to all the other internal auditors, listen very carefully. Right now, for Indonesia, I'm training a lot of internal auditors from Inspectorate General officers across the ministries. And one of the first things I tell them is that you must know how to write. You must know how to formulate. You must know how to capture the ESG supervision framework. ESG supervision framework, not the ESG framework. ESG framework sudah ada. It is found in ISSB. You can find with all the big four. But I want you to be able to formulate the ESG supervision framework. How to supervise ESG reporting in the companies. Number one, okay? Number two is that you got to be sure that you need all the enabling environment. Tiadaannya harus cocok berimplementasi ESG supervision framework. The environment, enabling environment. What does the enabling environment mean? That you must have the policy, you must have the people who knows how to implement it. And that requires training. So you have policy and peraturan, undang-undang, peraturan, pedoman you must have. Number two, you must have the capacity to implement it. Capacity, and that needs training. And it's not one day, it's not 2 days. You need a lot of training to build up the capacity to implement and to supervise the ESG. Number three, I ask you to look at, is there commitment from the leadership? Dari pemimpin, ada komitmen, ada tidak. Kalau tidak ada commitment, you can't go anywhere. So you must have those three pillars before you can solve the problem. Indonesia has already committed to reducing its carbon. These called NDCs, nationally determined commitment. You already committed that you want to be net zero by 2060, earlier if possible. Therefore, you must have those three things. And I repeat, number one, where is your supervision framework? Otherwise, internal auditors, what are you supervising? Number two, do you have the capacity to supervise and implement it? Number three, do your bosses approve of you to do what you want to do? If those three things are not around, Indonesia will take a long time.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
I won't get blacklisted.
All right. I hope so. Okay, Dr. Fong. The last question, maybe. I'm sorry we cannot read all of the questions that we we get a lot of questions from the audience, but I try to pick one question about Indonesia has carbon tax, which tax those who carbonize. Is it reliable enough to be used by internal auditor as parameter to determine a green finance company? From Fahri Raditya Insani. Maybe mungkin Pak Alexander Sianturi bisa menjawab ini, Pak, tentang carbon tax, jadi pajak karbon yang sudah diterapkan ini, apakah bisa digunakan sebagai parameter oleh internal audit?
Ya, secara detailnya saya tidak terlalu menguasai bidangnya ini ya, yang carbon tax ini. Tapi saya kira kalau kita sudah menerapkan di Indonesia sudah menerapkan carbon tax, jadi artinya sudah ada ukuran-ukuran yang bisa dipakai. Dan tentu saja pada saat menentukan apakah carbon tax itu bisa kita gunakan, jadi artinya ada insentif di sana kan. Jadi artinya ada insentif. Mestinya sudah ada ukurannya kan, dan balik lagi nih, pada saat ukurannya sudah ada, kita mesti kembali lagi ke hal di mana ukuran tersebut bisa di-verify kan gitu. Jadi artinya kita sampai sekarang masih punya isu masalah disclosure gitu, dan bagaimana matriksnya seperti apa itu masih punya isu. Nah jadi kalau memang ukuran tersebut bisa kita pakai dan juga kita bisa memverifikasi dan mendemonstrasi ke pihak yang berwenang untuk menentukan insentif tersebut, saya kira itu bisa menjadi benefit buat kita. Tapi di hal yang lain, saya kira itu juga hal yang bagus buat kita sebagai internal audit untuk melihat bagaimana penerapannya nih, penerapannya seperti apa gitu ya. Jadi bagaimana mekanisme pada saat kita melihat usulan dari sebuah organisasi untuk menerapkan carbon tax. Jadi ya, di sana nanti dia akan membuat atau mensupport serangkaian ukuran-ukuran yang dibuat sehingga mereka bisa mengklaim tax tertentu. Saya kira itu menjadi learning juga dalam prosesnya. Saya kira itu Pak Edo yang bisa saya sampaikan.
Baik Pak Alex. Probably Mr. Johnson raise hand wants to add something.
Yeah, I'm a troublemaker. I'm sorry. Because I hear carbon tax, it gets me. Anyway, let me share with you, and this is not very different from Pak Ido. Number one, to have carbon tax, you must know who is producing the carbon. Okay? Therefore, you need system informasi, management information system, who is producing the tax. I mean, who is producing this carbon? So that we can tax them. If you don't have the information, you tax nobody. Number one. Number two, what is the price of your carbon? Because you don't determine the right price, you can tax me. I will keep producing the carbon because I consider it cheap. Right? You tax me expensive, of course, I will try to do something. But where is the price? But if you tax me expensive, and if I'm a state-owned enterprise, if I am a BUMN, you can tax me all you like. It doesn't hurt me because it belongs to the government. So where is this pricing point? You see, Alex ran away. You know, he is frightened of what my answer is.
All right, yeah, Dr. Fong. It is difficult to find the correct price, isn't it? Whether it is, if it is too cheap, people is going to carbonize. But if it is too high, people tend to find a way, and then to making fraud, and it creates motives and opportunity to make a fraud. All right, maybe Dr. Gordon want to add some more about this topic, these issues about carbon tax?
Yeah, the only thing I'd like to add is that, again, one of the global discussions that has been ongoing for a little while is, firstly, a lot of people call it carbon pricing rather than carbon tax, because, of course, the word tax has very specific connotations. So you'll hear people talking about carbon pricing instead. It's the same thing. And secondly, border adjustments. So this is therefore, if you are making a product and then selling it into a different country, if you don't have any carbon pricing, or your carbon pricing is very low, there will be some sort of border adjustment to then take it up to that country into which you're selling it. So say, for example, something was being produced in Indonesia and sold into Australia. Say Australia has a very high carbon price. To help with that trade, that extra price would be added on top. Then, of course, that asks the question, who gets that? Indonesia or Australia? Now, of course, Indonesia wants it. And so therefore, it's in Indonesia's best interest to make sure that the carbon price that's set is at a similar or the same level as say, Australia. This is very interesting because if you look at some countries around the world, so Mexico, so currently the Mexican government isn't very supportive of climate change. They don't believe that climate change is real. So very similar to the American government in the Trump administration. And so therefore, what you're beginning to see is a big discrepancy between the US and Mexico. And so when carbon pricing properly comes into the US, and it's already in California, you're going to see a big step if Mexico wants to sell product into the US, and then also if the US is selling products into Mexico. So it's got big inferences with regards to global trade and also supply chains as well. And at the moment, nobody knows how to make it work.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gordon, for your thought. Well, we're come to the final or for the end of discussion today. I will conclude our discussion today. ESG is a complicated field that require loads of works and multidisciplines. One of the way to adapt and tackle the fraud in ESG, we could rely on the impact not in the compliance or standard. And we have to use technology in managing these issues, and it's also the better way to analyze the data and detecting the fraud. Thank you very much for your presentation today and discussion, Dr. Fong, Dr. Gordon, and Pak Alex. Saya kembalikan ke Mbak Sylvia. Terima kasih banyak.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Terima kasih atas diskusi panel yang sungguh luar biasa, bermanfaat dan menambah cakrawala wawasan kami semua. Thank you, Mr. John Fong, Ms. Sarah Gordon, Mr. Stefanus Alexander Sianturi, and Mr. Rahadian Widakdo for an enlightening and entertaining discussion. It was an honor to have you on the panel. We know your time is precious, and we are immensely grateful you were able to carve out some time with us. Tanpa mengurangi rasa hormat, kepada panelis dan moderator, kami persilahkan untuk melanjutkan kegiatannya. We really appreciate for all the panelists and moderator, Mr. John Fong, Ms. Sarah Gordon, Mr. Stefanus Alexander Sianturi, and Mr. Rahadian Widakdo. Thank you for helping make this webinar a great success, and we look forward to working with you at future events. Should you have any other arrangements or activities after this, please feel free to have your next agenda.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fong,
Thank you.
Dr. Gordon, Pak Alex.
Terima kasih, Pak Edo. Thanks,
Terima kasih,
Sarah.
Pak.
Thanks, John.
Afternoon.
You can speak Jawa. Okay.
Hadirin, kami ingatkan untuk seluruh peserta untuk mengisi daftar hadir pada link tersedia di Linktree Webinar Auditor. Karena sertifikat webinar akan dikirimkan ke email atau nomor WA yang telah didaftarkan. Semoga acara ini senantiasa membawa manfaat untuk kita semua dan untuk negara kita tercinta Indonesia. Kami ucapkan terima kasih yang sebesar-besarnya atas kehadiran Bapak Ibu sekalian. Mewakili penyelenggara, kami mohon maaf bila ada hal-hal yang kurang berkenan selama acara berlangsung. Bunga mawar, bunga melati, sungguh indah dipandang mata. Selesai sudah webinar AIP kali ini, semoga AIP semakin bermakna. Saya, Sylvia Sarumaha, izin undur diri dari hadapan Anda. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Shalom, Om Santi Santi Om, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Bapak Ibu, izin mengakhiri rangkaian webinar ini dan mematikan Zoom. Terima kasih.
Siaga di setiap waktumu akan selalu ditunggu integritasmu di dalam jiwaku.